Your mind is the quiet architect of your life. Before a single action is taken, before a word is spoken, before a path is chosen, the mind has already whispered its decision. It can be your most loyal companion, guiding you gently through confusion and fear. Or it can become your most difficult adversary, filling your inner world with noise, doubt, and restlessness. Buddhism teaches that the difference between these two paths is not fate, talent, or luck, but awareness. Imagine waking up each morning without being dragged by racing thoughts. Imagine facing criticism without anger rising like fire in your chest. Imagine temptation appearing before you, yet losing its power over your choices. This is not a fantasy reserved for monks or sages. It is the natural state of a trained mind. And training the mind, the Buddha taught, begins with understanding the enemy that lives closest to us, the one within. The Buddha never spoke of enemies as people to fight or conquer. Instead, he spoke of inner forces that cloud the heart and confuse the mind. These forces are subtle. They wear familiar faces. They sound like your own voice. Doubt tells you that you are not enough. Fear tells you that change is dangerous. Desire whispers that happiness lies just one more achievement away. Anger convinces you that peace can wait until justice is served. Together, these mental habits shape your inner world, often without your permission. In Buddhist teachings, these forces are called mental defilements, not because they make you bad, but because they blur your natural clarity. Greed pulls the mind outward, always grasping. Aversion pushes the mind into resistance and bitterness. Delusion keeps you unaware that you are trapped in these cycles at all. When left unseen, these patterns repeat themselves endlessly, like a wheel turning without rest. Picture your mind as a room you have lived in for years without cleaning. At first, the mess does not bother you. Over time, it becomes normal. Old beliefs pile up like broken furniture. Unfinished emotions gather dust in the corners. Unquestioned habits block the windows, letting in less and less light. You may feel restless, heavy, or exhausted without knowing why. The Buddha taught that suffering often begins not because life is difficult, but because we have never learned to observe our own minds clearly. The first tool the Buddha offered was mindfulness. Mindfulness is not about stopping thoughts or forcing calm. It is about seeing what is already there. It is the simple but powerful act of paying attention without judgment. Like turning on a light in that cluttered room, mindfulness reveals what has always been present, but unseen. When you practice mindfulness, you begin to notice how thoughts arise on their own. You see how emotions appear, change, and fade. Anger is no longer a permanent identity. It becomes a passing visitor. Fear is no longer a command. It becomes a sensation you can observe. This shift is subtle, yet life-changing. The moment you can observe a thought, it loses its authority over you. Imagine a child who becomes angry when another child takes a toy. Without awareness, the anger controls the response, shouting, pushing, crying. With mindfulness, something new becomes possible. There is a pause. In that pause, understanding arises. The child sees not just anger, but sadness beneath it, desire beneath that. In this small space of awareness, choice is born. This is where freedom begins. The Buddha taught that suffering does not come from emotions themselves, but from clinging to them. When you believe every thought, every fear, every desire, you become trapped inside your own reactions. Mindfulness loosens this grip. It does not ask you to fight your thoughts. It asks you to understand them. And what is understood no longer needs to control you. Think of the mind as a garden. Left unattended, weeds grow naturally. No one plants them, yet they appear. Negative thoughts are the same. They are not personal failures. They are natural tendencies of an untrained mind. The problem is not their appearance, but our inattention. When mindfulness is practiced, you begin to see which thoughts nourish you and which drain you. Slowly, gently, you stop feeding the weeds. In their place, patience, clarity, and compassion begin to grow. This process does not happen overnight. The Buddha never promised quick results. He promised truth. Training the mind is like learning to walk a long path. Each step matters. Each moment of awareness strengthens the next. Over time, what once felt overwhelming begins to feel manageable. What once felt permanent reveals itself as temporary. A disciplined mind is not a rigid mind. It is a flexible one. It does not suppress emotions, it understands them. It does not deny difficulty, it meets it with clarity. When challenges arise, the trained mind does not collapse into panic or aggression. It responds instead of reacting. This response is calm, intentional, and aligned with wisdom. In daily life, this training shows itself in simple ways. You become less distracted by noise, less pulled by comparison, less shaken by criticism. You begin to experience a quiet confidence, not because life has become easier, but because your relationship with it has changed. You are no longer fighting your mind. You are guiding it. The Buddha encouraged beginning with small, practical steps. Sit quietly for a few minutes each day. Observe the breath as it enters and leaves the body. When thoughts arise, do not chase them. When emotions appear, do not judge them. Simply notice. This simple practice builds awareness the way steady rain fills a lake. Slowly, without force. Another powerful practice is reflection. Writing down your thoughts reveals patterns you may never notice otherwise. You begin to see what triggers anger, what fuels fear, what feeds self-doubt. With understanding comes choice. With choice comes freedom. Letting go is the natural result of understanding. When you see clearly how a thought harms you, clinging to it becomes unnecessary. Letting go is not forgetting. It is releasing the grip. It is choosing peace over repetition. This creates space for growth, joy, and clarity. Patience is essential. The mind has been trained unconsciously for years. Undoing old habits takes time. Some days will feel calm. Others will feel chaotic. Both are part of the path. What matters is consistency. Small efforts repeated daily reshape the mind more powerfully than sudden bursts of motivation. As mindfulness deepens, a quiet inner peace emerges. This peace does not depend on silence or comfort. It exists even in difficulty. Like a still lake beneath moving clouds, it remains undisturbed by surface disturbances. From this peace, compassion naturally grows. You become kinder, not because you force yourself to be, but because clarity dissolves the need for conflict. This is the beginning of mental mastery, not domination, not control through force, but understanding so deep that chaos loses its grip. When the mind becomes your ally, your potential unfolds naturally. Goals become clearer. Actions become intentional. Life begins to feel aligned. This journey does not require perfection. It requires presence. Each moment of awareness is a step toward freedom. Each pause before reaction is a victory. And each day, you choose to observe your mind rather than obey it. You move closer to a life guided by wisdom instead of impulse. This is where the journey begins, not by changing the world, but by understanding the one within you. Not the movement of your body crossing a room, but the subtler movement of identity, your sense of who you are. One day, you feel confident. The next day, you feel small. One day, you are disciplined. The next, you fall back into old habits. Most people take this as proof that they are broken. Buddhism takes it as proof of something liberating. You are not fixed. You are not trapped. You are a river, not a statue. The Buddha called this truth anatta, non-self. It does not mean you do not exist. It means the self you cling to is not a permanent object. It is a collection of changing conditions, thoughts, memories, emotions, desires, fears, social roles, and expectations. When you see this clearly, your entire relationship with change transforms. If the self is not solid, then growth is not betrayal. It is nature. Reinvention is not pretending, it is awakening. And here is the secret. Most people never learn to train the mind. You must first shift the story you believe about who you are. Many people try to control the mind through force. They make strict plans, demand discipline, and punish themselves for failure. But a mind trained through shame becomes a mind at war with itself. Buddhism teaches a wiser path. Begin with right intention. Begin with identity, not as a rigid label, but as a direction. Like a traveler choosing which way the compass will point. Ask yourself, what kind of person do I want to become? Not what you want to achieve, not what you want others to praise, but who you want to embody. More present, more courageous, more compassionate, more focused, more calm. The moment you name this, you are planting a seed. And seeds, the Buddha reminded, do not become trees in a day. They grow through conditions, through daily water, daily sunlight, daily patience. This is where the practice becomes practical. If you want to become disciplined, you don't start by declaring war on your distractions. You start by creating proof, small, undeniable proof that a new identity is forming. Consider a person who says, I am not disciplined. That sentence is not a fact. It is a habit of thought. It is a story repeated so many times, it feels like reality. Buddhism teaches that your mind is shaped by repetition. What you feed grows stronger. If you feed the story of weakness, weakness becomes familiar. If you feed the story of growth, growth becomes natural. But you cannot simply chant affirmations and expect transformation. The Buddha did not teach magic words. He taught right effort, steady, consistent action aligned with wisdom. Words without action are empty. Action without intention is blind. When intention and action unite, identity shifts. Imagine a young musician learning an instrument. At first, the hands tremble. The notes are awkward. Progress feels invisible. If the musician keeps saying, I am not musical, the mind will search for proof of failure. Every wrong note becomes evidence. But if the musician begins to think, I am becoming someone who practices something, changes. Every small session becomes proof of growth. The mind starts to cooperate rather than resist. This is how identity becomes a tool for mental discipline. Let's make it real. Suppose you want to be a mindful person. The old self says, I can't focus. My mind is messy. The new direction says, I am learning to be mindful. Then you do something small, 5 minutes of meditation. That may seem insignificant, but it is not. In the language of the mind, it is a message. This is who we are becoming. A single action will not transform you, but repeated actions reshape the mind, the way water reshapes stone, quietly, steadily, irresistibly. There is a story often told in the spirit of Buddhist teaching, not as a historical record, but as a mirror. A traveler once arrived at a village known for its pottery. The traveler watched an old potter at work and asked, How did you become so skilled? Your hands move like they already know the shape before it appears. The potter smiled and pointed to a pile of broken clay pots behind him. "Those are my teachers," he said. "I made them when I was still someone who did not know. But each time I touched the clay again, I became someone new. Not because I wished for it, but because I returned," the traveler asked. "So you were never afraid of failing?" The potter replied, "Failure is only a name given by the impatient. The clay does not judge. It only responds to the hands that return. This is how you should treat your mind, not as an enemy to defeat, but as clay to shape through repetition." Now, identity shifts also require one painful act, letting go of who you were. This is difficult because even our suffering becomes familiar. Even our bad habits become part of our story. We cling to them because they feel like me. Buddhism teaches that this clinging is the root of suffering. When you hold tightly to an old identity, change feels like losing yourself. But the truth is, the opposite, clinging to a false self, is what keeps you lost. If you have been procrastinating for years, the mind begins to accept procrastination as identity. You don't just delay tasks, you become a procrastinator. Then every time you sit down to work, you are fighting not just distraction, but a self-image. The mind whispers, "This isn't who we are. We always delay." Why try a Buddhist approach is gentler and sharper at the same time? You don't argue with the voice. You observe it. You see it as a conditioned thought, not a command. You recognize it as a habit shaped by past causes, fear of failure, perfectionism, exhaustion, or the desire to escape discomfort. Once you understand the cause, you stop hating yourself for the symptom. Then you create a new cause, a small action completed on time. Not a heroic transformation, a modest victory. Finish one task today, then another tomorrow. Each one is a chisel striking a stone. The shape slowly changes. And what happens when you fall back? This is where Buddhism becomes most compassionate. You do not treat setbacks as proof that you are unchanged. You treat setbacks as proof that you are human. The Buddha never asked you to become flawless. He asked you to become awake. And awakening includes seeing how easily the mind slips back into old patterns and returning anyway. If you meditate for a week and miss a day, the old identity says, "See, you can't do it." The new identity says, "We missed a day. Now we return." Returning is not weakness. Returning is the path. To strengthen identity shifts, you must also pay attention to what surrounds you, your environment, routines, and relationships. Buddhism calls this understanding conditions-dependent arising. You are not shaped by willpower alone. You are shaped by what you repeatedly experience. If your environment feeds distraction, your mind will be distracted. If your environment supports clarity, clarity becomes easier. A simple example: if your phone is always within reach, your mind will be pulled toward it. Not because you are weak, but because the condition is strong. Changing identity sometimes begins with changing small conditions, placing the phone in another room, creating a quiet corner for practice, setting a timer, choosing a consistent time of day. These are not tricks. They are wisdom working with the mind instead of against it. Identity shifts also become powerful when connected to kindness. If you want to become compassionate, don't wait for grand opportunities. Do small acts of care. Listen fully when someone speaks. Offer help without needing praise. Speak gently when anger rises. Each act becomes a seed, and seeds grow into character. One day, you will notice something surprising. You are no longer trying to be different. You simply are different. The mind will start to trust the new story because it has been proven through action. And when the mind trusts, your discipline becomes less of a struggle and more of a natural expression. Because discipline is not a whip. It is alignment, When you align intention and action, you begin to feel a quiet integrity. You begin to respect yourself, not because you are perfect, but because you are consistent. That respect is not ego, it is stability. It becomes the ground you stand on when life shakes. And life will shake. Change will come. Loss will come. Uncertainty will come like rain on a road. But when your identity is rooted not in fixed labels, but in practice, returning, observing, learning, you become unbreakable in a gentle way. You bend, you adapt, you continue. So the next lesson is not about becoming rigid. It is about becoming flexible enough to meet chaos without losing yourself. Because impermanence is not a problem to solve. It is the ocean you are already sailing. Life rarely unfolds according to our plans. Even when everything seems carefully arranged, a single moment can shift the entire direction of a day, a relationship, or a lifetime. A message arrives, a door closes, a certainty dissolves. Most of the suffering we experience does not come from these changes themselves, but from the quiet resistance we carry inside the belief that life should stay still so we can feel safe. Buddhism offers a radical truth: nothing stays still, and peace is found not in control, but in balance. The Buddha named this truth anicca, impermanence. Everything that arises will change. Every emotion, every situation, every identity you cling to will eventually pass. When this truth is misunderstood, it creates fear. When it is understood deeply, it creates freedom. Because if change is unavoidable, then your task is not to stop it, but to learn how to move with it. Imagine life as a wide river. Some days, the water flows gently, reflecting the sky. Other days, it surges with force, carrying debris and noise. An untrained mind tries to fight the current, exhausting itself in resistance. A trained mind learns how to stay afloat, adjusting its movement without panic. This is what Buddhism points to when it speaks of skillful living within uncertainty, what we might call controlled chaos. Controlled chaos does not mean disorder or carelessness. It means inner steadiness in the middle of outer change. It means knowing what you can influence and releasing what you cannot. When the mind stops demanding permanence, it gains flexibility. And flexibility is strength. One of the first practices the Buddha offered for meeting impermanence was acceptance. Acceptance is often misunderstood as weakness or surrender. In Buddhist teaching, acceptance is clarity. It is the recognition of what is already happening without adding fear or resistance on top of it. When something unexpected occurs, the first response of a trained mind is not panic, but pause. Take a breath. Feel the body. Acknowledge the moment as it is. This pause is powerful. It interrupts the automatic reaction that leads to suffering. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to ask, "What is happening right now, and how can I meet it wisely?" In this shift, the mind regains agency. Meditation plays a crucial role here. When you sit in stillness, focusing on the breath, you are not escaping chaos. You are training your mind to remain stable while sensations change. Thoughts arise and pass. Discomfort appears and fades. Restlessness comes and goes. Each meditation session becomes a rehearsal for life itself. You learn that no state is permanent, and therefore no state has the power to define you. There is an old teaching often shared in Buddhist circles. A monk once asked his teacher, "How do I remain peaceful when everything keeps changing?" The teacher picked up a cup, filled it with water, and placed it in the monk's hands. Then he began to walk. At first, the monk focused only on keeping the water from spilling, but as the ground became uneven, he grew tense. His arms stiffened. His breath shortened. Water spilled anyway. The teacher stopped and said, "You are trying to control the water. Walk instead with awareness." When the monk softened his grip and adjusted his steps, the water settled. Not because the ground became smooth, but because the monk became attentive. Life does not demand rigidity. It demands awareness. Another way to work with uncertainty is to intentionally face small amounts of discomfort. Buddhism does not encourage chasing pain, but it recognizes that growth requires meeting what we avoid. When you gently step outside your comfort zone, you teach your mind that uncertainty is survivable. Each time you face a small challenge without collapsing, resilience grows. This might mean trying something new without waiting for confidence to appear first. It might mean speaking when silence feels safer. It might mean staying present with an uncomfortable emotion instead of numbing it with distraction. These moments are like weights for the mind, light at first, then stronger over time. The disciplined mind does not demand certainty before acting. It acts with awareness even when certainty is absent. Flexibility is also strengthened by focusing on what you can control. Buddhism teaches that much of our anxiety comes from trying to manage what was never ours, to manage other people's thoughts, the outcome of every effort, the future beyond this moment. When you release this burden, the mind becomes lighter. You cannot control the weather, but you can choose how you dress. You cannot control every event, but you can choose how you respond. You cannot control change, but you can control attention. This redirection of focus is not avoidance. It is wisdom. By investing energy only where it has influence, the mind conserves strength and clarity. Gratitude is another quiet anchor in times of uncertainty. When change unsettles you, gratitude reminds you of what remains, not in a forced or artificial way, but through gentle awareness. Even in difficulty, there is breath, there is learning, there is presence. Gratitude does not deny pain, it balances perspective. Physical care also supports mental steadiness. The Buddha emphasized the middle way, understanding that extremes weaken the mind. Rest, nourishment, and movement are not distractions from discipline, they are foundations for it. A tired body struggles to hold a calm mind. Caring for yourself is not indulgence, it is preparation. Letting go, perhaps the hardest practice, is also the most liberating. Letting go does not mean giving up responsibility. It means releasing the illusion that you must control everything to be safe. When you loosen this grip, something unexpected happens. Creativity emerges. Solutions appear. The mind becomes open instead of tense. In uncertainty, creativity thrives. When rigid plans dissolve, new possibilities enter. Many breakthroughs are born from moments that first felt like chaos. The disciplined mind does not fear these moments, it listens to them. Resilience grows not by avoiding storms, but by learning you can stand within them. Each time you adapt instead of resist, your confidence deepens. You begin to trust not that life will be predictable, but that you can meet whatever arises. And this trust changes everything. Impermanence stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like movement, like breath, like life itself. You stop clinging to moments and start participating in them. You stop demanding certainty and start cultivating presence. This is controlled chaos, not a perfectly ordered world, but a mind steady enough to move within disorder without losing its center. As you learn to flow with change, another realization emerges. Success is not only about reaching goals, but about the systems you live within each day. Because a calm mind needs structure, not rigid rules, but supportive rhythms. And that is where the next lesson begins. Many people believe discipline is built by chasing goals. They imagine that once a goal is clear enough or important enough, motivation will magically appear and carry them forward. But goals are distant by nature. They live in the future, while your life happens only in the present. Buddhism reminds us again and again, suffering begins when the mind abandons now in favor of an imagined later. This is why goals alone are fragile foundations for change. The Buddha did not teach obsession with outcomes. He taught attention to causes. A goal tells you where you want to arrive. A system shapes who you become while walking there. One depends on motivation, which rises and falls. The other depends on practice, which quietly endures. When discipline is built on systems, it no longer waits for inspiration. It moves through routine awareness and repetition. Think of a system as a riverbed. Water flows naturally where the path is prepared. Without a riverbed, the water spreads, stagnates, or disappears. In the same way, the mind needs structure, not strict control, but gentle guidance. A well-designed system reduces the number of decisions you must make, and fewer decisions mean less inner conflict. Buddhism understands this deeply. This is why monastic life is filled with routines, waking at the same time, eating mindfully, practicing daily meditation. These routines are not prisons. They are supports. They free the mind from unnecessary struggle so it can turn inward with clarity. In everyday life, systems serve the same purpose. If you want to become more mindful, waiting for the right mood will rarely work. Instead, create a system. Meditate for 10 minutes every morning before the day claims your attention. Write a short reflection each night before sleep carries the mind away. Pause for 3 conscious breaths whenever stress appears. These actions may seem small, but together they form a structure the mind can rely on. The power of a system lies in consistency, not intensity. There is a story often shared in Buddhist-inspired teachings. A young student asked a teacher, "Is it better to meditate for 1 hour once a week or 10 minutes every day?" The teacher replied, "Which path shapes the mountain more, the thunderstorm or the quiet rain?" Discipline shaped by systems is quiet rain. At first, systems feel unimpressive. They lack drama. They do not promise instant transformation, but they work because they align with how the mind actually changes through repetition, familiarity, and reduced resistance. Each small action lowers the barrier to the next one. Over time, what once required effort becomes automatic. This is especially important when motivation fades. Goals can feel far away on difficult days. Systems remain. You don't ask whether you feel like practicing. You simply follow the path you prepared when your mind was clear. To build a system, begin with one area of life you want to stabilize. Not everything at once. Buddhism warns against grasping too much too quickly. Choose one direction, then break it down into the smallest actions you can repeat daily without resistance. If your aim is mental clarity, your system might include a short morning meditation, limited exposure to digital distractions, a brief evening reflection. If your aim is physical health, your system might include daily movement, even if gentle, regular sleep and meals, awareness while eating. Notice how none of these depend on results. They depend only on presence. Another advantage of systems is that they shift focus from success and failure to practice. When the mind is attached to outcomes, every setback feels personal. But when the mind is committed to a system, mistakes become part of the rhythm. Missing a day is not a collapse. It is a momentary interruption. The system remains. You return. This aligns with a core Buddhist insight: the path is not linear. Progress unfolds in waves. Some days feel clear, others feel heavy. Systems allow you to continue without needing to judge each moment. They protect you from extremes overconfidence and despair. Systems also support compassion toward yourself. When discipline is goal-driven, the inner voice often becomes harsh. I should be further by now. I failed again. Buddhism teaches that harshness toward the mind only strengthens resistance. A system replaces self-judgment with structure. Instead of arguing with yourself, you follow the routine. Instead of criticizing failure, you return to practice. Over time, this creates trust. The mind learns that you will show up not perfectly, but consistently. And trust is the soil where discipline grows. There is also joy hidden in systems. When you stop chasing future rewards, you begin to notice the quiet satisfaction of daily practice. The breath becomes familiar. The routine becomes grounding. The process itself becomes meaningful. This is what the Buddha meant by freedom from craving, not the absence of desire, but the release of dependence on outcomes for happiness. Systems also help when life becomes unpredictable. Goals can collapse when circumstances change. Systems adapt. If you cannot meditate for 10 minutes, you sit for 3. If you cannot exercise fully, you move gently. The system bends without breaking. This flexibility is essential. Discipline is not rigidity. It is reliability. It is the ability to continue under changing conditions. Another important aspect is environment. Buddhism teaches that the mind is shaped by conditions. A system works best when the environment supports it. If your space invites distraction, discipline will always feel like resistance. If your space encourages focus, discipline becomes natural. Simple changes matter. Designate a quiet place for reflection. Reduce unnecessary noise. Prepare what you need in advance. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of wisdom, recognizing how the mind responds to its surroundings. As systems stabilize your daily life, something subtle begins to happen. Discipline stops feeling like effort. It becomes identity. You don't think of yourself as someone trying to be mindful. You become someone who practices. You don't see routines as obligations. You see them as anchors. And with this foundation, a deeper capacity emerges: self-command. Self-command is not about suppressing emotion or forcing obedience. It is about guiding the mind with awareness instead of being dragged by impulse. It is the natural result of stable systems and clear attention. When your life has rhythm, your reactions slow. When reactions slow, wisdom has space to appear. And that space between feeling and action is where freedom lives. In the next lesson, we will explore how to strengthen that space, how to pause in moments of intensity, and how to become the steady captain of your inner world. There is a moment, often so brief it goes unnoticed, where everything can change. It appears between a feeling and an action, between the spark of anger and the words that follow, between the urge to escape and the choice to stay. Most lives are shaped by what happens in that small space. Buddhism teaches that mastery of the mind is not about erasing emotions, but about learning to live inside that pause with clarity. This is the heart of self-command. Without self-command, the mind is reactive. It moves like a leaf in the wind, pushed by praise, blame, desire, and fear. With self-command, the mind becomes responsive. It still feels, still senses, still cares, but it chooses. The Buddha described this as freedom, not from experience, but from compulsion. Self-command begins with awareness of emotional energy as it arises. Anger, for example, does not appear fully formed. It starts as a sensation: heat in the chest, tension in the jaw, a quickening of thought. If unnoticed, it accelerates and takes over. If noticed early, it can be guided. Imagine someone speaks harshly to you. The untrained mind reacts instantly. Words fire back. The body tightens. Later comes regret. The trained mind does something different. It notices the surge. It feels the breath. It recognizes anger is here. This recognition alone weakens anger's grip. What was once automatic becomes optional. The Buddha taught that mindfulness creates distance, not separation, but space. Space allows wisdom to enter. In that space, you can ask a simple question. What response aligns with who I want to be? Not what feels satisfying in the moment, but what leads to peace rather than repetition. Developing this capacity requires practice, not theory. One of the simplest and most effective practices is conscious breathing. When emotions rise, the breath is the first anchor. 3 slow breaths taken with full attention can interrupt a chain reaction that would otherwise unfold unchecked. This is not avoidance. It is regulation. You are giving the nervous system time to settle so the mind can lead again. Meditation strengthens this skill daily. When you sit and observe thoughts without following them, you are training the exact muscle needed in real life. Each time a thought arises and you return to the breath, you are rehearsing self-command. Each time discomfort appears and you stay present, you are building resilience. There is a quiet story that illustrates this practice. A student once asked a Zen teacher, "How can I stop my anger?" The teacher replied, "Show it to me." The student paused, confused. "I can't. It's gone." The teacher smiled. "Then why do you fear something that cannot stay?" The lesson was not that anger is weak, but that it is temporary. What gives anger power is not its presence, but our belief that we must act on it. Self-command also grows through reflection. After a difficult interaction, instead of replaying it with blame, you examine it with curiosity. Where did emotion arise? When did reaction take over? What could have created more space? This reflection is not self-criticism. It is learning. Over time, patterns emerge. You begin to recognize which situations trigger you most. Fatigue, feeling ignored, being rushed. When these patterns are known, they lose surprise, and what no longer surprises you has less control. Buddhism emphasizes compassion in this process. Self-command is not harsh discipline. It is gentle leadership. If you treat the mind like an enemy, it rebels. If you treat it like a child, firm but kind, it learns. There will be moments when you fail. You will react. You will speak too quickly. You will choose comfort over growth. This does not erase progress. The only failure is unconscious repetition. Awareness, even after the fact, still strengthens the path. Self-command transforms relationships. When you are no longer ruled by immediate emotion, listening becomes easier. Defensiveness softens. Conflicts become conversations rather than battles. Others feel this change even if they cannot name it. Calm is contagious. It also transforms focus. In work or study, impulses to distract arise constantly. The trained mind notices the impulse without obeying it, not through force, but through clarity. This urge will pass. And it does. Each time you resist impulsive distraction, you reinforce the mind's trust in your leadership. Over time, a deep confidence forms, not arrogance, but steadiness. You know that whatever arises inside you, you can meet it without being overwhelmed. This confidence reduces fear of challenge. You stop avoiding difficulty because you trust your ability to respond wisely. Self-command is also closely linked to freedom from regret. Most regret comes from moments where impulse ruled over values. When you learn to pause and choose your actions, align more closely with who you wish to be. Even when outcomes are imperfect, integrity remains. The Buddha never taught control for its own sake. He taught liberation. Self-command is not about dominating the mind, but about freeing it from cycles that no longer serve you. It is the ability to act from clarity rather than compulsion. And as this clarity deepens, another challenge becomes visible, the subtle addiction to comfort. Because often what pulls us out of alignment is not chaos or anger, but the quiet temptation to stay where growth does not demand us. In the next lesson, we will explore why comfort can become a cage and how the disciplined mind learns to step beyond it without violence or force. Comfort feels safe. It asks little of you. It wraps the mind in familiarity and promises protection from uncertainty. The body relaxes, the mind settles, and resistance fades. There is nothing wrong with comfort itself. The Buddha did not teach rejection of pleasure or denial of rest. What he warned against was attachment, the quiet belief that comfort must be preserved at all costs. When comfort becomes an attachment, it shapes decisions without being questioned. You avoid what challenges you, not because it is harmful, but because it is unfamiliar. You delay growth, not because you lack ability, but because discomfort feels threatening. Over time, the comfort zone becomes a boundary, and life begins to shrink within it. Buddhism teaches the middle way, a path between extremes. This means neither chasing pleasure nor worshiping struggle. It means recognizing when comfort supports balance and when it weakens the mind. True discipline is the ability to remain open to discomfort without seeking suffering. Ask yourself honestly, how many times have you stayed silent to avoid awkwardness even when truth wanted to be spoken? How many times have you postponed action to avoid effort even when clarity was calling? These are not moral failures. They are habits of comfort. The problem with comfort is not how it feels in the moment, but what it costs over time. There is a quiet strength that forms when you willingly meet small discomforts. Each time you step slightly beyond what is easy, the mind learns that discomfort is survivable. More than that, it learns that discomfort often carries growth. This realization changes everything. The Buddha taught that liberation does not come from avoiding pain, but from understanding it. Discomfort is simply sensation combined with resistance. Remove the resistance, and what remains is experience, temporary, workable, and instructive. Meditation offers a direct way to see this. When you sit in stillness, discomfort inevitably appears. The body aches. The mind grows restless. The urge to move arises. In these moments, you have a choice: escape or observe. Each time you choose observation, you are training the mind to stay present with difficulty. This skill transfers directly into life. There is an old story often used to illustrate this. A student complained to a teacher, "Meditation is uncomfortable. My legs hurt. My mind won't stay still." The teacher replied, "Good. Now you are learning." "What am I learning?" the student asked. "That discomfort is not an enemy," the teacher said. "It is a teacher that stays only if you resist it." In daily life, conquering the addiction to comfort begins with small, intentional challenges. Not reckless acts, but gentle expansions. Wake up a little earlier. Begin a task you have been avoiding. Have a conversation you have been postponing. Stay with an emotion instead of numbing it with distraction. These acts may seem insignificant, but they accumulate. Each one sends a message to the mind: I can handle more than I thought. and the mind responds by expanding its sense of capability. Reframing discomfort is essential. Instead of seeing it as a threat, begin to see it as a signal. Often, discomfort appears at the edge of growth. It marks the boundary between who you have been and who you are becoming. When approached with awareness, it becomes a guide rather than a barrier. Consider physical training. Muscles grow not during comfort, but during recovery from strain. The strain itself is not the goal. It is the condition that triggers adaptation. The mind works the same way. Without challenge, it remains familiar. With challenge, it evolves. Another aspect of comfort is avoidance of failure. Comfort whispers, "Stay where you are. At least you won't be disappointed." But Buddhism teaches that fear of failure is fear of impermanence. Failure, like success, is temporary. When you stop equating failure with identity, its power fades. The disciplined mind does not measure worth by comfort or outcome. It measures alignment. Did you act with awareness? Did you choose growth over avoidance? If yes, the moment was successful, regardless of result. This approach also deepens compassion. When you understand your own tendency toward comfort, you become gentler with others. You recognize that resistance is human, not shameful. From this understanding, patience arises naturally. It is important to note that stepping beyond comfort does not mean ignoring joy or rest. The middle way reminds us that renewal is necessary. Rest supports growth. Pleasure, when not clung to, nourishes the heart. The danger lies not in comfort itself, but in letting it dictate your limits. As you practice meeting discomfort with awareness, something subtle changes. What once felt intimidating begins to feel familiar. Fear loses its edge. Confidence grows, not the loud kind, but the quiet assurance that you can remain present regardless of sensation. This confidence reshapes identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who avoids difficulty and start seeing yourself as someone who meets life directly. And from this identity, discipline flows more easily. Discomfort also strengthens resilience. When challenges arise unexpectedly, and they will, you are no longer shocked by their presence. You have practiced staying with unease. You know how to breathe through tension. You know how to pause instead of flee. This is freedom. Not freedom from difficulty, but freedom within it. And as this freedom grows, a deeper question begins to surface. Why am I doing all of this? What is the purpose behind discipline itself? Because discipline without meaning becomes exhaustion. But discipline aligned with a higher purpose becomes a source of energy. In the next lesson, we will explore how to connect discipline to what truly matters, so effort feels guided, not forced. Discipline without meaning is heavy. It feels like carrying a weight with no destination, like walking simply to prove you can endure the pain. Many people begin their journey of self-control with energy and determination, only to burn out when effort turns into obligation. Buddhism offers a deeper insight. Discipline must be rooted in purpose, or it will eventually collapse under its own weight. The Buddha never taught discipline as self-punishment. He taught it as alignment between what you do each day and what you hold most deeply as true. When discipline is connected to a higher purpose, it stops feeling like force and begins to feel like direction. Ask yourself this question slowly and honestly. Why do I want to train my mind? If the answer is only success, praise, or control, discipline will feel fragile. These motivations depend on external conditions, and conditions always change. But if the answer touches something deeper, peace, compassion, wisdom, freedom, then discipline becomes resilient. Even when motivation fades, meaning remains. In Buddhism, intention is everything. The Buddha taught that actions are shaped not only by what you do, but by why you do it. Two people may perform the same action, yet one moves closer to liberation, while the other remains stuck. The difference lies in intention. Imagine waking up early to meditate. If your reason is self-judgment, I must fix myself, the practice quickly becomes tense. But if your reason is care, I want to understand my mind and reduce suffering, the same practice feels gentle, even nourishing. The action is identical. The inner result is not. This is why discipline aligned with purpose feels lighter, even when it is demanding. You are no longer forcing yourself forward. You are moving towards something meaningful. To find this purpose, Buddhism encourages reflection on values, not abstract ideals, but lived qualities. What kind of presence do you want to bring into the world? Do you want to be someone who reacts with anger, or someone who responds with clarity? Do you want to contribute to confusion or to calm, to harm or to healing? These questions are not meant to pressure you. They are meant to clarify direction. When your purpose is clear, discipline becomes an expression of care for yourself and for others. You meditate not to escape life, but to meet it wisely. You train your attention not to dominate the mind, but to free it from unnecessary suffering. You practice patience not to appear calm, but to reduce harm. There is a simple story often shared in Buddhist teaching. A student asked, "Why do you practice every day, even when it is difficult?" The teacher answered, "So that when suffering appears, I do not add more suffering to it." This is higher purpose. Discipline as prevention. Discipline as compassion. When you connect discipline to something larger than personal gain, your effort gains dignity. Even small actions feel meaningful. Drinking water mindfully becomes an act of respect for life. Pausing before speaking becomes an act of kindness. Returning to practice after failure becomes an act of courage. Purpose also protects discipline from perfectionism. When meaning is clear, mistakes no longer define you. You understand that discipline is not about being flawless, but about being sincere. You return, not because you failed, but because you care. This sincerity is powerful. It transforms how you see yourself. You stop identifying as someone who lacks discipline and start identifying as someone who is walking a path. Paths include uneven ground. What matters is direction, not speed. Purpose also brings patience. When you know why you are practicing, you are less rushed by results. You trust the process. You allow growth to unfold at its own pace. This patience aligns with a core Buddhist insight: awakening is not forced. It is cultivated. Another important aspect of higher purpose is its impact on others. Buddhism reminds us that no one lives in isolation. Your state of mind affects the people around you. When you cultivate clarity, you bring calm into shared spaces. When you practice compassion, you soften conflict. When you train your mind, you quietly serve the world. This understanding changes discipline from a private struggle into a shared contribution. You are not just improving yourself, you are reducing suffering wherever your presence reaches. Purpose also helps you make decisions. When faced with choices, instead of asking, "What is easiest?" you begin to ask, "What aligns with my values?" This question simplifies life. It cuts through confusion. It brings coherence to action. And when discipline is aligned with purpose, it becomes self-renewing. Effort feeds meaning. Meaning feeds effort. The cycle sustains itself. There will still be days of resistance. Days when comfort tempts you. Days when old habits return. Purpose does not eliminate these moments, but it gives you something to return to. A reminder of why you began. A reason to begin again. This is the quiet strength the Buddha pointed toward. Not the strength of domination, but the strength of alignment. When mind, intention, and action move together, life feels whole. As this alignment deepens, something remarkable happens. Discipline stops being something you do and becomes something you are. Not as a label, but as a way of moving through the world with care, clarity, and steadiness. And from this steadiness, the remaining lessons unfold naturally. When discipline is aligned with purpose, the mind begins to settle into a deeper rhythm. Effort no longer feels like resistance against yourself, but cooperation with something wiser inside you. Yet even with clarity of purpose, there remains one subtle obstacle that quietly pulls the mind off course again and again: distraction. Not loud chaos, but gentle drifting. Not crisis, but forgetfulness. The Buddha taught that the mind's greatest weakness is not intensity of desire, but wandering. A wandering mind leaks energy. It starts many things and finishes few. It is busy, but not fulfilled. This is why training attention is not optional. It is essential. Attention is the currency of your life. Whatever you give it to grows stronger. Whatever you neglect fades. When attention is scattered, even meaningful discipline loses power. When attention is gathered, even simple actions become transformative. Think of attention like sunlight. When spread thin, it warms little. When focused, it ignites growth. Buddhism does not ask you to force focus through tension. It teaches collection, gently bringing the mind back again and again, without judgment. This practice is called samadhi, often translated as concentration or unified attention. It is not rigid fixation, but relaxed presence. Every time you notice that your mind has wandered and return it to the present moment, you strengthen attention. Not by suppressing distraction, but by understanding it. Distraction is not failure. It is the training ground. There is a quiet paradox here. The mind becomes stable, not by never wandering, but by learning how to return. This is why meditation is structured around something simple: the breath, a sound, a sensation. The object itself is not important. What matters is the act of returning. Each return is an act of discipline rooted in awareness. A short story reflects this well. A student complained, "My meditation is terrible. My mind wanders constantly." The teacher asked, "How many times did you notice it wander?" "Many," the student replied. The teacher smiled. "Then you were mindful many times." The training of attention also applies to daily life. When eating, eat. When walking, walk. When listening, listen. These acts sound simple, but they are profound. Multitasking fractures attention. Presence gathers it. You may notice resistance here. The mind likes stimulation. It seeks novelty, noise, escape. Buddhism does not condemn this tendency, it explains it. The mind chases stimulation because it fears stillness. In stillness, unresolved thoughts and emotions surface. Distraction becomes a way to avoid meeting oneself. But what is avoided grows stronger in the shadows. When you gently reduce distraction, clarity increases. You begin to notice subtle emotions that were previously drowned out by noise. At first, this can feel uncomfortable. Restlessness may rise. Boredom may appear. This is not regression, it is exposure. You are seeing what was always there. The disciplined mind does not run from this moment. It stays. Staying does not mean forcing silence. It means allowing experience without escape. When boredom arises, you observe boredom. When restlessness arises, you observe restlessness. Over time, these states lose their urgency. The mind learns that it does not need constant stimulation to survive. This realization is powerful. It returns authority to you. As attention strengthens, decision-making improves. You notice impulses before acting on them. You catch distractions earlier. You become selective about what enters your mind. This selectivity is not restriction. It is respect. You begin to ask quietly, "Is this worthy of my attention?" This question changes habits. It shapes environment. It simplifies life. Attention also deepens purpose. When you are fully present with what you do, meaning becomes immediate. You are no longer chasing fulfillment, you are inhabiting it. Discipline stops being about the future and becomes rooted in now. There is another important aspect of attention rest. A scattered mind rarely rests deeply. Even during sleep, it continues to churn. As attention becomes steadier, rest improves naturally. The nervous system settles. The body recovers. This is not achieved by effort, but by reduction of unnecessary mental noise. The Buddha understood this balance well. He taught effort without strain, focus without tension. When attention is trained gently, it becomes sustainable. This stage of the path is quiet but decisive. You may not feel dramatic change, but something fundamental shifts. Life feels less rushed. Moments feel fuller. Discipline feels lighter. And from this collected attention, a new quality begins to emerge: wisdom. Not intellectual knowledge, but clear seeing. Seeing what leads to suffering and what leads away from it. Seeing what to cultivate and what to release. In the next part, we will explore how this clarity sharpens discernment and how wisdom becomes the guiding force behind all true discipline. As attention gathers and the mind becomes steadier, something subtle yet powerful begins to awaken discernment. Discernment is the quiet intelligence that knows what to follow and what to release. It is not judgment, not harsh criticism, and not endless analysis. In Buddhism, this quality is called panya wisdom, born from direct seeing. Without discernment, discipline can turn mechanical. You may follow routines, build habits, and practice restraint, yet still feel lost. With discernment, every action becomes guided. You begin to understand why certain choices lead to peace, while others lead back to restlessness. This understanding does not come from books alone. It arises naturally from mindful observation. The Buddha often said that wisdom grows when you see clearly the relationship between cause and effect. When the mind is calm and attentive, this relationship becomes obvious. You notice that certain thoughts drain your energy. Certain conversations leave you agitated. Certain habits create heaviness instead of freedom. At the same time, you see that other actions bring lightness, clarity, and ease. Discernment is learning to listen to these signals. Imagine touching a flame. You do not need a philosophy book to know it burns. The body learns immediately. In the same way, a mindful life teaches the mind what leads to suffering and what leads away from it. Discipline then becomes less about rules and more about intelligence. This is why the Buddha did not offer commandments. He offered experiments. Observe, he said. See for yourself. Wisdom is not borrowed, it is discovered. There is a story often shared to illustrate this. A man once asked the Buddha, "How do I know what is right and what is wrong?" The Buddha replied, "When you act and suffering increases for yourself or others, know that this is unskillful. When you act and suffering decreases, know that this is skillful." Simple. direct, profound. As discernment develops, the mind becomes more economical. You stop wasting energy on inner battles that do not matter. You stop arguing with reality. You stop feeding thoughts that lead nowhere. This is not suppression, it is understanding. Discernment also softens extremes. You begin to see that discipline does not mean harshness, and freedom does not mean indulgence. Both extremes create imbalance. Wisdom naturally steers you toward the middle way, where effort is steady and sustainable. This balance shows itself in everyday choices. You eat in a way that nourishes rather than numbs. You speak in a way that clarifies rather than inflames. You rest when rest is needed and act when action is required. Life becomes simpler not because there are fewer responsibilities, but because there is less inner conflict. Discernment also protects you from comparison. When wisdom guides your path, you stop measuring your progress against others. You understand that each mind has its own conditions, its own pace. Comparison dissolves because it is no longer relevant. You are attentive to your own causes and effects. Another important function of discernment is recognizing false urgency. Many impulses feel urgent but are not important. The trained mind learns to pause and ask, "Does this matter?" Often the answer is no. This pause saves enormous energy. Wisdom also brings humility. The more clearly you see, the more you understand how much remains unseen. This humility is not weakness. It keeps the mind open, curious, and willing to learn. It prevents discipline from becoming rigid or prideful. At this stage, discipline feels almost effortless, not because effort disappears, but because resistance does. You are no longer forcing yourself away from suffering. You are naturally moving toward clarity. The Buddha described this as right view guiding right effort. When understanding is correct, effort follows naturally. You do not need to push a river downhill. This does not mean challenges vanish. Emotions still arise. Habits still surface. But now, when difficulty appears, you meet it with intelligence instead of frustration. You recognize it as part of the path, not a detour from it. Discernment also deepens compassion. When you see clearly how suffering arises in your own mind, you recognize it in others. Judgment softens. Patience grows. You respond with understanding instead of blame. This compassion reinforces discipline. You no longer practice only for yourself. You practice because clarity reduces harm, because presence brings peace, because wisdom spreads quietly through how you live. And now, as wisdom stabilizes the mind, another transformation begins to take shape: inner simplicity. The mind naturally starts letting go of what it no longer needs. In the next part, we will explore how simplicity emerges not as deprivation, but as freedom, and how letting go becomes the final strength of a disciplined mind. As wisdom matures, the mind begins to simplify, not because you force yourself to let go, but because holding on starts to feel unnecessary. What once felt essential now feels heavy. What once demanded attention quietly loosens its grip. This is not loss. In Buddhism, this is called renunciation, not the rejection of life, but the release of what no longer serves it. Renunciation is often misunderstood. Many imagine it as giving up joy, comfort, or connection. The Buddha taught something far more subtle. True renunciation is internal. It is the ability to enjoy life without clinging to it, to participate fully without being owned by the experience. When the mind becomes disciplined and clear, it naturally recognizes excess. Excess of desire, excess of worry, excess of stimulation. These excesses drain energy. Letting go restores it. Think of carrying a bag filled with stones you collected over many years. At first, you hardly notice the weight. You grow used to it. But as awareness sharpens, you begin to feel the strain. Renunciation is not throwing the bag away in anger. It is opening it and asking stone by stone, do I still need this? Some stones are old grudges. Some are expectations you never chose. Some are identities that once protected you, but now restrict you. When you set them down, the relief is immediate and surprising. The Buddha emphasized that suffering arises from clinging, not from experience itself. Pleasure passes. Pain passes. What hurts is the demand that things stay the way we want them to. When discipline reveals this truth, simplicity emerges naturally. Inner simplicity shows itself first in the mind. Fewer arguments with reality. Fewer stories about how things should be. Less mental noise. This does not make life empty. It makes it spacious. You begin to notice how much of your stress came from mental commentary, from replaying conversations, from imagining futures, from resisting what already is. As attention sharpens, these habits lose momentum. There is a gentle story often told in Buddhist teaching. A student asked, "What did you gain from meditation?" The teacher replied, "Nothing." Confused, the student asked, "Then why practice?" The teacher smiled, "Because I lost what I no longer needed." This is the power of letting go. Simplicity also appears in daily life. You become more selective with commitments, more intentional with time. You no longer say yes to everything, not out of selfishness, but out of clarity. You understand that every yes is also a no to rest, to presence, to depth. This clarity strengthens discipline. When your life is less cluttered, your systems become easier to maintain. When your schedule breathes, your mind follows. Simplicity supports consistency. Renunciation also softens desire. Desire does not disappear, but it changes character. It becomes preference rather than compulsion. You can enjoy success without clinging to it. You can experience comfort without fearing its loss. This balance is freedom. Another aspect of simplicity is honesty. As the mind clears, self-deception becomes harder to maintain. You see more clearly when you are avoiding exaggerating or distracting yourself. This honesty is not harsh, it is clean. It frees energy that was previously tied up in maintaining illusions. With simplicity comes contentment, not passive satisfaction, but quiet enoughness. You stop chasing constant stimulation. You find joy in ordinary moments, breathing, walking, listening. These moments were always available. The disciplined mind simply makes room for them. Contentment does not kill ambition. It purifies it. You still act, create, and contribute, but without the hunger that distorts intention. Effort becomes steady rather than desperate. The Buddha described this state as nibbana in daily life, the cooling of unnecessary fires. Greed cools. Aversion cools. Confusion cools. What remains is clarity, warmth, and presence. Letting go also prepares the mind for difficulty. When fewer things are clung to, fewer things can be threatened. Loss still hurts, but it does not devastate. Change still challenges, but it does not break you. This inner simplicity becomes a refuge, not an escape from the world, but a way of living in it without being overwhelmed. As discipline, wisdom, and simplicity come together, the mind becomes quiet enough to hear something deeper. Compassion, not as an idea, but as a natural response. In the next part, we will explore how compassion arises from a disciplined mind and how caring for others becomes an extension of caring for yourself. When the mind becomes quieter and less burdened, something warm begins to flow naturally outward. It is not forced kindness, not moral obligation, and not sentimental emotion. It is compassion, a clear seeing of suffering combined with the wish to reduce it. In Buddhism, compassion does not arise from weakness. It arises from understanding. As long as the mind is crowded with its own struggles, compassion feels effortful. You may want to be kind, but irritation gets in the way. You may wish to help, but exhaustion pulls you back. When discipline simplifies, the inner world space opens. In that space, compassion appears on its own. The Buddha taught that true compassion begins with insight, seeing that all beings struggle under conditions they did not choose. Just as you did not choose your fears, your habits, or your wounds, neither did anyone else. This recognition softens judgment. It replaces blame with curiosity. It replaces anger with patience. Compassion does not mean agreeing with harmful behavior. It means understanding its roots. When you see clearly how craving, fear, and confusion drive actions, hatred loses its logic. You may still set boundaries. You may still say no, but you do so without inner violence. There is a story that reflects this teaching. A disciple asked the Buddha, "How should I respond to someone who harms me?" The Buddha replied, "With a mind free of hatred." The disciple pressed, "And if they harm me again, still without hatred? And if they continue, then you protect yourself, but without hatred." This is disciplined compassion. It is strong, clear, and non-reactive. Compassion also turns inward. A disciplined mind does not attack itself for imperfection. It recognizes struggle as part of the human condition. This self-compassion is not indulgence. It is the foundation for growth. When the inner voice becomes kind, the mind becomes willing to learn. Many people believe self-criticism motivates change. Buddhism teaches the opposite. Harshness tightens the mind. Kindness opens it. A mind that feels safe can change. A mind under attack resists. When you miss a practice, compassion says, "Return." When you fail, compassion says, "Learn." When you feel lost, compassion says, "Stay." This gentle guidance sustains discipline far longer than force ever could. Compassion also sharpens awareness. You begin to notice subtle suffering in yourself and in others. You sense when words are about to wound. You pause before acting in ways that create harm. This sensitivity is not fragility. It is refinement. In daily life, compassion expresses itself quietly, listening fully instead of interrupting, speaking honestly without cruelty, offering help without needing recognition. These actions may seem small, but they shape the atmosphere around you. The Buddha taught that the mind is contagious. A calm mind spreads calm. A kind mind softens tension. When your discipline stabilizes your inner state, you become a refuge for others, not by teaching, but by being. Compassion also deepens purpose. Your discipline is no longer only about personal freedom. It becomes part of a larger movement toward reducing suffering. This gives effort a new dimension. Even difficult practices feel worthwhile because they serve more than just the self. At this stage, discipline and compassion are no longer separate. Structure supports kindness. Kindness sustains structure. Together, they create balance. There is also courage in compassion. It takes strength to remain open in a world that often rewards aggression. It takes discipline to respond with patience when anger feels justified. But this courage is grounded in clarity. You know that adding suffering never reduces suffering. As compassion stabilizes, something else becomes possible: forgiveness. Not forgetting, not excusing, but releasing the burden of carrying resentment. Forgiveness is not given to others, it is given to yourself. The disciplined mind understands this deeply. Holding on to resentment costs energy. It disturbs sleep. It clouds perception. Letting go restores peace. This letting go does not deny pain. It frees you from reliving it endlessly. Forgiveness also applies to the past self. Many people are trapped not by present conditions, but by old identities they refuse to release. Compassion allows you to see your past actions through the lens of understanding rather than shame. You acted with the awareness you had at the time. Now awareness has grown. That is not a crime, it is progress. With compassion, discipline becomes humane. It adapts. It listens. It responds. It does not harden. And now, as compassion integrates into daily life, the mind becomes ready for a deeper form of freedom, non-attachment, not indifference, but the ability to love, act, and care without clinging. In the next part, we will explore how non-attachment completes the training of the mind and how freedom and engagement can exist together. When compassion matures, the mind naturally approaches a deeper freedom, non-attachment. This is one of the most misunderstood teachings in Buddhism. Many believe non-attachment means withdrawing from life, suppressing love, or becoming emotionally distant. The Buddha taught the opposite. Non-attachment is not the absence of care. It is care without chains. Attachment says, I need this to be happy. Non-attachment says, I can love this without owning it. The disciplined mind learns this distinction through experience, not philosophy. You begin to see that clinging creates tension, while openness creates ease. You still love. You still strive. You still commit. But you no longer demand that life obey your expectations in order for you to feel whole. Attachment tightens the mind. It turns preference into insistence. It whispers, this must last, or this must not change. But impermanence does not negotiate. When attachment meets change, suffering is born. Non-attachment removes the argument before it begins. There is a simple image often used in Buddhist teaching. Hold sand tightly in your fist, and it slips away. Hold it gently in your open palm, and it stays. Non-attachment is the open palm. This quality transforms relationships profoundly. When you are attached, you seek control. You fear loss. You interpret change as rejection. When you are non-attached, you allow others to grow. You listen without clinging. You support without possession. Love becomes lighter, not weaker. The disciplined mind recognizes that attachment often disguises itself as care. But care rooted in fear is unstable. Care rooted in clarity is steady. Non-attachment also reshapes ambition. You continue to act with dedication, but outcomes no longer define your worth. Success does not inflate the ego. Failure does not collapse it. You measure yourself not by results, but by integrity of effort. This does not reduce excellence. It refines it. When fear of loss is removed, creativity increases. When anxiety about outcome fades, presence deepens. You perform better, not because you are desperate, but because you are free. The Buddha taught that attachment arises from misunderstanding. We cling because we believe things can give permanent satisfaction. Through mindfulness and wisdom, this illusion dissolves. You see that experiences pass, but awareness remains. You stop chasing permanence in a changing world. Non-attachment also brings emotional resilience. Feelings still arise: joy, sadness, excitement, grief. But they move through the mind without becoming identity. You feel fully without drowning. You experience deeply without being consumed. This balance is subtle and powerful. There is a quiet practice that supports non-attachment, noticing the urge to grasp. When desire arises, instead of acting immediately, you pause. You observe the sensation. You ask, what happens if I don't follow this? Often the urge fades, not because you fought it, but because you saw it clearly. Each time you do this, trust grows. Trust in impermanence. Trust in yourself. Trust that you can experience desire without obeying it. Non-attachment also reduces fear. Much of fear comes from imagined loss. When you stop defining yourself by what you hold, fear loses its foundation. You still protect what matters, but you no longer panic at the possibility of change. This does not make you careless. It makes you courageous. Another aspect of non-attachment is letting go of views. Opinions, beliefs, and self-images can become attachments. When held rigidly, they divide and isolate. The disciplined mind holds views lightly, open to learning, willing to revise. This flexibility is a sign of strength, not weakness. As non-attachment deepens, inner peace becomes less dependent on circumstances. You stop bargaining with life. You meet it. Calm is no longer something you search for. It is something you return to. At this stage, discipline feels almost invisible. There is effort, but no strain. There is commitment, but no rigidity. Life flows, and you move with it. The Buddha described this as living unbound, engaged yet free, caring yet unattached, active yet at peace. From here, the path turns inward one last time, not toward withdrawal, but toward integration, bringing everything together: discipline, wisdom, compassion, and freedom into one way of being. In the next part, we will explore how these teachings integrate into daily life, shaping not just moments of practice, but the way you live each ordinary day. When non-attachment takes root, life does not become distant or colorless. It becomes integrated. The division between practice and life begins to dissolve. There is no longer meditation on one side and daily chaos on the other. Everything becomes part of the path. This is what the Buddha pointed to when he spoke of right living, a way of moving through the world with awareness, intention, and balance. Integration means you stop waiting for perfect conditions to be mindful. You no longer think, I will be calm when life slows down. Instead, calm becomes something you carry into movement. The disciplined mind learns to remain present, not only in silence, but in conversation, work, conflict, and change. This is where the teachings leave the cushion and enter the street. Mindfulness now expresses itself in ordinary actions. When you wake, you notice the first breath. When you speak, you feel the intention behind your words. When you walk, you sense the body moving through space. These moments are not dramatic, but they are transformative. Presence becomes continuous rather than occasional. The Buddha taught that liberation is not found by escaping the world, but by understanding it. Every moment contains the same ingredients: sensation, thought, feeling, reaction. Integration is learning to recognize these ingredients wherever you are. There is a story that reflects this truth. A monk was once asked, "What do you do after enlightenment?" He replied, "I chop wood and carry water." The meaning is simple and profound. Life continues. Duties remain. Challenges arise. What changes is the relationship to them. Integration also means aligning actions with values consistently. Discipline becomes ethical, not as a rule book, but as sensitivity. You feel when a word will cause harm. You sense when silence is wiser than speech. You recognize when action is needed and when restraint serves better. This sensitivity arises naturally from clarity. When the mind is not clouded by craving or fear, it can respond accurately to each situation. Ethics become intuitive rather than imposed. Integration also reshapes how you experience time. The future no longer dominates attention. The past loses its grip. The present becomes rich enough to inhabit fully. This does not mean you stop planning or remembering, it means you stop living elsewhere. With this shift, anxiety reduces. Much of anxiety comes from mental time travel. When attention returns to now, the nervous system settles. The body relaxes. The mind becomes available. Integration also affects work. Whether your work is creative, physical, or intellectual, it becomes a practice. You notice effort and tension. You adjust. You work with care rather than urgency. Productivity improves not through pressure, but through presence. Relationships also deepen. When you are present with others, they feel it. Listening becomes real. Empathy becomes natural. You respond rather than rehearse. Even difficult conversations become less charged because you are not defending an identity. Integration does not mean perfection. Old habits still arise. Emotions still surge. But now they are met sooner, corrected faster, released more easily. Recovery becomes part of the flow rather than a crisis. There is humility in integration. You no longer need to appear spiritual or disciplined. You simply live attentively. You allow learning to continue. The path remains alive. Another important aspect of integration is balance. Discipline without softness becomes rigidity. Compassion without structure becomes exhaustion. Integration holds both: effort and ease, commitment and flexibility, structure and openness. This balance reflects the middle way once more, not swinging between extremes, but resting in alignment. As integration deepens, life feels less fragmented. You are no longer one person in practice and another in public. Integrity forms. This integrity is quiet but powerful. It reduces inner conflict because actions match understanding. From this place, discipline no longer requires constant effort. It is sustained by coherence. You do what you know leads to peace. You avoid what you know leads to confusion, not out of fear, but out of clarity. The Buddha described this state as being your own refuge. You no longer rely on external conditions for stability. You have trained the mind to return to awareness wherever you are, and when life brings inevitable loss, change, or uncertainty, as it always will, you meet it with grounded presence rather than collapse. You grieve when needed. You act when possible. You rest when required. This is integration. From here, the remaining lessons are not new teachings, but deeper refinements. The mind learns how to meet suffering, your own and others, without being overwhelmed. In the next part, we will explore how the disciplined mind responds to pain and adversity, and how suffering itself becomes a teacher rather than an enemy. No matter how disciplined the mind becomes, life will still bring pain. Loss arrives without permission. Illness interrupts plans. Relationships strain. Effort does not always lead to the outcome you hoped for. Buddhism never promised a life without suffering. What it offered instead was something far more realistic and far more powerful: the ability to meet suffering without being destroyed by it. The disciplined mind does not ask, "How do I avoid pain forever?" It asks, "How do I relate to pain wisely?" When it appears, the Buddha made a clear distinction between pain and suffering. Pain is unavoidable. It is part of having a body, a heart, and a life that changes. Suffering is optional. Suffering arises when the mind resists pain, judges it, or turns it into identity. When pain is met with awareness, it remains pain. When it is met with resistance, it multiplies. Imagine being struck by an arrow. That is pain. Then imagine shooting yourself with a second arrow made of thoughts. This shouldn't be happening. Why me? This will never end. That second arrow is suffering. Discipline is learning to put the second arrow down. This does not mean becoming cold or detached. It means becoming honest. When sadness arises, you allow sadness. When grief comes, you grieve. You do not rush to escape. You do not tell yourself to be strong prematurely. Strength in Buddhism is the courage to feel without drowning. Mindfulness becomes essential here. When pain appears, the trained mind turns toward it rather than away. It notices sensation in the body. It notices thoughts forming stories. It notices emotions rising and falling. This observation does not erase pain, but it prevents it from spreading unchecked. There is a teaching often attributed to the Buddha. You cannot stop the waves, but you can learn how to surf. The disciplined mind learns to surf pain. It stays balanced. It adjusts. It falls sometimes, but it gets back on the board. It does not curse the ocean for being an ocean. Compassion plays a vital role in this stage. When suffering arises, self-compassion softens the inner response. Instead of harsh inner commands, there is gentleness. Instead of self-blame, there is understanding. You speak to yourself the way you would speak to someone you love who is hurting. This inner kindness reduces secondary suffering. It allows pain to move through rather than become lodged. Suffering also becomes a teacher. When met with awareness, it reveals impermanence directly. You see that even intense pain changes. You see that emotions peak and fade. You see that the mind can remain present even when conditions are difficult. This realization builds unshakable confidence. The disciplined mind also learns when to act and when to accept. Buddhism does not glorify endurance for its own sake. If pain can be reduced through wise action, you act. If it cannot, you soften resistance. Wisdom lies in knowing the difference. Adversity also strips away illusions. In difficult moments, superficial desires lose importance. What remains are essentials, presence, connection, meaning. Many people discover their deepest clarity not in comfort, but in challenge. Discipline allows this clarity to emerge without bitterness. Another quiet transformation occurs here. Empathy deepens. When you understand your own suffering intimately, you recognize it in others. Compassion becomes immediate. You listen differently. You judge less. You understand that everyone is carrying something unseen. The Buddha taught that suffering, when understood, leads to wisdom. Not abstract wisdom, but lived insight. You stop expecting life to protect you from pain. You stop demanding guarantees. You learn to stand. Standing does not mean being rigid. It means being rooted. When adversity passes, and it always does, the disciplined mind does not rush back to distraction. It reflects. It integrates the lesson. It carries forward a deeper steadiness. This steadiness changes how you approach future challenges. Fear reduces. Not because you believe nothing bad will happen, but because you know you can meet whatever does. This is one of the greatest freedoms Buddhism offers. And now, as the mind learns to meet suffering with clarity and compassion, it begins to develop a quiet trust, not in outcomes, but in the path itself. In the next part, we will explore how trust replaces anxiety and how faith in practice becomes the final support of a disciplined, peaceful mind. As the mind learns to meet suffering without panic, a quiet shift takes place. Anxiety begins to loosen its grip, not because life becomes predictable, but because something deeper has formed trust. In Buddhism, this trust is not blind belief. It is confidence born from experience, confidence in the path and awareness, and in your capacity to respond wisely. The Buddha called this saddha, a calm faith, grounded in understanding. It is not faith in ideas, but faith in practice. You trust mindfulness because you have seen how it steadies the mind. You trust compassion because you have felt how it reduces conflict. You trust discipline because you have lived its benefits. This trust changes your relationship with uncertainty. Instead of asking, "What if everything goes wrong?" you begin to ask, "How will I meet whatever happens?" The focus shifts from control to readiness, and readiness is something you can cultivate. Trust also softens urgency. When you believe that the path works, you stop rushing progress. You no longer demand immediate transformation. You allow growth to unfold. This patience is not passive, it is confident. The disciplined mind understands that effort accumulates invisibly. Like seeds beneath the soil, changes are happening even when nothing seems different. Trust allows you to continue watering without digging up the ground to check. There is a simple teaching often shared in Buddhism. Do not worry about the fruits of practice. Tend the causes. Trust keeps you tending. This trust also extends inward. You begin to trust your ability to pause, to choose to return. You no longer fear your own emotions as much. You know that anger will pass, that sadness will soften, that confusion will clear. You stop identifying with temporary states. This inner trust reduces self-doubt. The voice that once asked, "Am I doing this right?" grows quieter. Not because all questions vanish, but because confidence grows. You are no longer dependent on constant reassurance. You know how to check in with awareness. Trust also stabilizes discipline during difficulty. When motivation disappears, and it will trust carries you forward, you continue practice not because you feel inspired, but because you know it works. This is mature discipline. In relationships, trust creates openness. You stop trying to control others' responses. You speak honestly without clinging to outcomes. You listen without preparing defenses. This does not make you naive. It makes you grounded. Trust also allows vulnerability. You no longer need to appear strong at all times. You can admit uncertainty. You can ask for help. You can rest. This flexibility protects against burnout. There is an important balance here. Trust does not mean complacency. It does not mean assuming everything will be easy. It means trusting the process enough to stay engaged without force. It is confidence paired with humility. The Buddha warned against two extremes: doubt that paralyzes and faith that blinds. Trust sits in the middle. It is open questioning and steady. As trust deepens, the mind becomes less defensive. You stop bracing for disappointment. You stop assuming the worst. This does not eliminate pain, but it reduces unnecessary fear. With less fear, attention widens. You become more present with others, more appreciative of small moments, more responsive to opportunity. Life feels less like a threat and more like a field of experience. This is not optimism. It is stability. Trust also strengthens ethical discipline. When you trust the path, you do not need external enforcement to act with integrity. You understand that harmful actions disturb the mind. Beneficial actions settle it. This understanding guides behavior naturally. At this stage, discipline feels self-sustaining. You no longer rely heavily on rules, reminders, or pressure. awareness itself becomes the guide. You notice when something leads away from peace and adjust, and yet the path continues to deepen. With trust established, the mind becomes ready for its final refinement, letting go of the self-image of being disciplined, releasing even the idea of I am practicing, and allowing life itself to become practice. In the next part, we will explore this subtle shift, how effort dissolves into naturalness, and how the trained mind begins to move freely without losing direction. There comes a quiet moment on the path when effort begins to soften, not because discipline disappears, but because the idea of discipline loosens. The mind no longer says I must practice, or I am someone who is disciplined. Those thoughts once served a purpose. They helped build structure, direction, and commitment. But now, they too are gently released. This is a subtle but important stage. The Buddha taught that attachment can cling even to good things, even to practice itself. When identity forms around being disciplined, tension quietly returns. Pride may appear. Comparison may creep in. Fear of losing progress may arise. Freedom once again becomes conditional. So the path asks for another letting go. Discipline transforms from something you do into something you live. At this stage, mindfulness no longer feels like an activity you switch on and off. It becomes the background awareness of your life. You notice thoughts as they arise without needing to label them. You feel emotions without needing to manage them constantly. Attention rests more easily in the present moment. There is less effort because there is less resistance. The Buddha compared this to learning to play a musical instrument. At first, every movement is deliberate. Fingers feel stiff. Mistakes are frequent. With practice, technique becomes natural. The musician no longer thinks about each note, the music flows. Discipline follows the same arc. You still wake up and practice. You still pause before reacting. You still choose clarity over impulse. But it no longer feels like control. It feels like alignment. This naturalness is not carelessness. It is refinement. You have internalized the path deeply enough that it guides you without constant instruction. Like a well-trained compass, the mind naturally points toward balance. At this point, humility deepens. You no longer feel the need to measure yourself. You recognize that the path has no finish line. There is nothing to prove. Practice continues because it is simply how life is lived. The Buddha often warned that clinging to spiritual identity is one of the last obstacles to freedom. When you think I am mindful, the mind subtly separates itself from others. When you think I am disciplined, the self solidifies again. True freedom is lighter than that. So you begin to practice without naming it. Walking becomes walking. Listening becomes listening. Responding becomes responding. Life itself becomes meditation. In this space, spontaneity returns. You are no longer rehearsing responses internally. You meet situations directly. Because the mind is not busy defending an image, it can adapt freely. Wisdom expresses itself in the moment, not as a rule, but as intuition. This does not mean mistakes stop happening. It means mistakes are met without drama. You adjust. You learn. You continue. There is no collapse of identity, because identity is no longer the center. Another quiet shift happens here. Joy becomes simpler. Joy is no longer tied to achievement or progress. It arises from presence, from being fully where you are, from acting without inner conflict. This joy is calm, steady, and durable. The Buddha described this as ease, a sense of being at home in experience. Not because everything is pleasant, but because nothing needs to be pushed away. At this stage, effort becomes almost invisible. Others may still see discipline in your actions, your steadiness, your clarity, your restraint, but internally, it feels like flow. You are not forcing yourself to be calm. Calm is the natural result of not fighting what arises. This is why advanced practice looks ordinary. There is no dramatic display, no constant self-improvement talk, just a life lived attentively. From here, the mind becomes ready to engage fully with the world again, not as a seeker trying to fix itself, but as a human being participating with wisdom. In the next part, we will explore how this natural discipline expresses itself in service contribution and meaningful action, how inner freedom becomes outward benefit. When discipline becomes natural and the self-image around practice fades, attention turns outward in a new way, not driven by obligation, not by the need to prove worth, but by a quiet understanding. Inner freedom naturally seeks expression. In Buddhism, this expression is called service, not as sacrifice, but as a natural movement of clarity and compassion into the world. The Buddha never taught withdrawal from life as an end. He taught awakening within life. When the mind is no longer tangled in constant self-concern, energy becomes available. That energy flows outward as care contribution and meaningful action. At this stage, helping others does not feel heavy. It does not feel like something added to an already full life. It feels like alignment. You act because it makes sense, not because you are trying to be good. This is an important distinction. When action comes from ego, it seeks recognition. When it comes from clarity, it seeks effectiveness. The disciplined mind is interested in what reduces suffering, not in how it appears. Service expresses itself in many forms. It may look like teaching, creating listening, or simply showing up consistently. It may be quiet or visible. The form does not matter. The intention does. The Buddha emphasized right action and right livelihood as natural outcomes of inner clarity. When the mind is settled, it naturally avoids harm. It chooses honesty. It values kindness, not as rules, but as understanding. Consider how this shows up in daily life. You become more reliable, not because you fear consequences, but because you respect your word. You act thoughtfully, not because you are restrained, but because awareness reveals impact. You notice how your tone affects others. You sense when silence is more supportive than advice. This sensitivity is not weakness. It is precision. There is a simple story that reflects this stage. A villager asked a monk, "How do I serve the world?" The monk replied, "See clearly what is needed and do that." Service does not require grand gestures. Often it requires presence. Many people are not lacking solutions, they are lacking being seen. The disciplined mind offers attention without distraction. This alone can be healing. Service also includes boundaries. Compassion without wisdom becomes exhaustion. At this stage, you know when to help and when to step back. You do not confuse self-neglect with virtue. You understand that sustaining clarity requires balance. This balance is a sign of maturity. You give without depletion. You rest without guilt. You act without attachment. Another important shift occurs here. Your sense of purpose expands beyond the personal. Discipline is no longer about self-improvement. It is about participation. You see yourself as part of an interconnected field. Your actions ripple outward. This understanding brings humility. You recognize that you are not the center, nor are you insignificant. You are a condition among conditions. This perspective dissolves both arrogance and self-doubt. The Buddha taught that awakening naturally expresses itself as compassion in action, not because someone commands it, but because suffering becomes impossible to ignore when seen clearly. At this stage, obstacles still arise. Fatigue, frustration, disappointment, all are part of human life, but they are met differently. You no longer ask, "Why is this happening to me?" You ask, "What is needed now?" This question cuts through drama. It brings focus. Service also deepens practice. When you act in the world, new attachments are revealed. New blind spots appear. Life becomes the teacher. Each interaction becomes feedback. You adjust. You refine. This keeps the path alive. It prevents stagnation. You also begin to see that service is not always comfortable. It may involve difficult conversations. It may require patience. It may mean standing firm when others are reactive. But because your mind is not seeking comfort as its primary goal, you remain steady. The disciplined mind can hold tension without hardening. There is also joy here, not excitement, but meaning. A sense that your life is aligned with something larger than habit or survival. This meaning sustains effort when circumstances are challenging. At this point, the path begins to feel complete, not because there is nothing left to learn, but because nothing essential is missing. You live, practice, serve, and adjust. And yet, one final refinement remains: learning to rest fully in equanimity. The ability to remain balanced amid praise and blame, gain and loss, success and failure. In the next part, we will explore equanimity as the quiet crown of a disciplined mind. When service becomes natural and action flows without self-centered effort, the mind approaches a rare and powerful balance: equanimity. In Buddhism, equanimity is not emotional coldness. It is not indifference. It is the steady calm that remains when life moves through its inevitable cycles: praise and blame, gain and loss, joy and sorrow. The Buddha taught that these opposites are unavoidable. They are woven into the fabric of human life. What determines suffering is not their appearance, but how tightly the mind grips them. Equanimity is the trained ability to stay present without being thrown off balance. Imagine standing at the center of a wide field while the weather changes. Sunshine comes, rain follows, wind rises, then fades. You do not demand that the sky behave differently. You adjust, remain upright, and continue walking. Equanimity is that inner posture. Without equanimity, discipline becomes fragile. A little praise inflates the ego. A little criticism discourages effort. Success creates attachment. Failure creates doubt. The mind swings constantly, exhausted by its own reactions. With equanimity, the mind rests. Praise is received without intoxication. Blame is heard without collapse. Success is appreciated without clinging. Failure is examined without shame. This balance is not apathy. You still care deeply. You simply no longer let external conditions define your inner stability. The Buddha described equanimity as the culmination of mental training because it integrates everything that came before it. Mindfulness allows you to notice reactions. Wisdom helps you understand them. Compassion softens them. Discipline steadies them. Equanimity frees you from their control. There is a short teaching often shared. A rock does not praise the wind for being gentle, nor curse it for being strong. Equanimity is becoming like that rock, not rigid, but grounded. In daily life, equanimity shows itself quietly. When plans fall apart, you adapt instead of panicking. When people misunderstand you, you clarify without resentment. When outcomes disappoint you, grieve without despair. This emotional maturity does not come from suppression. It comes from deep acceptance. Equanimity also protects kindness. Without it, compassion can turn into burnout. With it, you can care without being consumed. You help where you can, release where you must, and trust the unfolding of causes beyond your control. This trust is not passive. It is intelligent acceptance. The disciplined mind understands effort and surrender as partners, not opposites. You do your part fully. Then, you let go of the rest. This prevents bitterness and preserves energy. Equanimity also changes how you see yourself. Identity becomes less reactive. You no longer define yourself by temporary roles or moods. You recognize that the mind can host many states without being any of them. This recognition brings freedom. You stop chasing constant happiness. You stop fearing sadness. Both are visitors. You remain the host. In this space, inner peace becomes durable, not because nothing disturbs you, but because disturbance no longer owns you. You recover faster. You learn quicker. You continue with less drama. The Buddha taught that equanimity is born from understanding impermanence deeply. When you truly see that everything changes, you stop fighting change. You participate in it. This does not remove passion from life. It purifies it. You still commit. You still strive. But you are not shattered by outcomes. This makes action more effective, not less. At this stage, discipline feels complete. Not finished, but integrated. The mind knows how to attend, how to choose, how to care, how to let go. What remains now is not another technique, but a quiet return to simplicity, to living fully without excess striving. In the next part, we will explore how to live from this equanimity in an imperfect world, and how to maintain balance without withdrawing from life's complexity. Equanimity does not remove you from the world. It allows you to remain fully in it without being overwhelmed. This is one of the Buddha's most practical gifts, the ability to live wisely in an imperfect, unpredictable reality. Life does not suddenly become gentle or fair. What changes is your relationship with its rough edges. The disciplined mind no longer seeks a flawless environment. It understands that waiting for perfect conditions is another form of avoidance. Instead, it learns how to maintain balance within complexity. This means accepting contradiction. You can feel grief and gratitude at the same time. You can be committed and uncertain simultaneously. You can act decisively while remaining open to revision. The mind becomes spacious enough to hold multiple truths without collapsing. This spaciousness reduces inner conflict. Much of our stress comes from demanding emotional purity, wanting to feel only calm, only confident, only happy. Buddhism teaches that wholeness includes complexity. Equanimity allows emotions to coexist without hierarchy. Living this way requires ongoing attentiveness, not rigid vigilance, but gentle awareness. You check in with the body. You notice tension. You soften. You notice attachment forming. You loosen it. These adjustments happen naturally when attention is well trained. One way equanimity expresses itself is through realistic compassion. You care deeply, but you do not expect instant results. You help without demanding transformation. You love without needing guarantees. This realism prevents disappointment from hardening into bitterness. The Buddha emphasized that each being walks their own path, shaped by their own conditions. Equanimity respects this truth. You offer guidance when invited. You support when possible. You release when necessary. This respect also applies to yourself. You stop demanding constant progress. You understand that clarity fluctuates. Some days are strong, others are quiet. Both are part of the rhythm. You no longer panic during low energy phases. You rest knowing balance will return. Equanimity also simplifies decision-making. When the mind is not ruled by fear or craving, choices become clearer. You ask, what is appropriate now, rather than what will protect my image? This shift reduces hesitation and regret. In work, this looks like steady effort without burnout. You do what needs to be done. Then stop. You accept praise without dependency and criticism without collapse. You remain open to feedback without losing confidence. In relationships, equanimity creates safety. Others feel less pressured around you. They sense that your care does not come with hooks. This openness invites honesty and deepens trust. Equanimity also changes how you experience uncertainty. Instead of filling unknown space with worry, you allow it to remain open. You prepare where you can and remain present where you cannot. This prevents the mind from exhausting itself with imagined futures. There is a quiet courage in this way of living. You are willing to feel disappointment without numbing. You are willing to risk care without control. You are willing to act without guarantees. This courage is grounded, not dramatic. The Buddha often described the awakened mind as unshakable, not because it is rigid, but because it understands what cannot be controlled and releases the struggle against it. Living from equanimity does not mean withdrawing from complexity. It means engaging wisely. You stay informed without being consumed. You care without burning out. You act without clinging. This balance allows you to remain human, deeply human, without being overwhelmed by the weight of the world. As life continues to unfold, equanimity becomes a quiet home you return to again and again. A place within that is not dependent on circumstances. And from this place, one final insight becomes clear. The journey was never about becoming someone new. It was about remembering what was already possible when the mind is no longer obstructed. In the next part, we will reflect on this realization and how to live from it without seeking arrival or final answers. At this stage of the journey, something quietly dissolves the feeling that you are going somewhere. The urgency to arrive fades. The mind no longer treats peace as a destination in the future. It recognizes that every step of the path was already the path itself. This realization does not stop movement, it changes its quality. The Buddha often warned that the desire for arrival can become the final obstacle. When the mind believes one day I will be complete, it overlooks the completeness that is already present in awareness. Discipline, wisdom, compassion, and equanimity were never meant to build a new self. They were meant to clear the view. This is a subtle but liberating insight. You realize that nothing essential was ever missing. What was missing was attention. What was clouded was understanding. As the clouds thin, the sky does not need to be improved, it only needs to be seen. This realization brings deep relaxation. The nervous striving that once powered discipline releases its grip. Effort remains, but tension does not. You continue to practice, to serve, to refine, but without the sense that your worth depends on progress. Life becomes lighter. There is a teaching attributed to the Buddha that captures this moment. There is nothing to add, nothing to remove. Only see clearly. Seeing clearly does not mean constant insight or uninterrupted calm. It means meeting each moment honestly without trying to make it something else. When joy arises, you enjoy it. When pain arises, you attend to it. When confusion appears, you investigate it. No state is treated as a mistake. This way of living restores dignity to ordinary experience. Washing dishes, waiting in line, feeling tired, feeling inspired, all are equal grounds for awareness. Nothing is beneath practice. Nothing is outside the path. This also changes how you relate to teachings themselves. You no longer cling to words, concepts, or identities. Teachings are tools, not truths to defend. When a tool has served its purpose, you set it down. When another is needed, you pick it up. This flexibility is a sign of maturity. The disciplined mind now trusts direct experience more than interpretation. You listen carefully to what the moment is showing you. You adjust. You respond. You move on. At this point, silence becomes more meaningful than explanation. Not because language is rejected, but because understanding has become embodied. You live the answer rather than repeating it. This embodiment shows itself in calm presence, in the way you sit, in the way you speak, in the way you pause before responding. Others may feel at ease around you without knowing why. This is not charisma. It is coherence. Coherence means your inner world and outer actions are no longer at odds. You are not performing discipline. You are expressing it. You are not chasing peace. You are living from it. Importantly, this realization does not isolate you. It deepens connection. When the self is less defended, relationships become more authentic. You meet others without masks. You allow difference without threat. You listen without waiting to reply. This openness makes life richer, not simpler in content, but simpler in conflict. The Buddha taught that awakening is not a special state removed from humanity. It is intimacy with reality as it is. This intimacy includes uncertainty, imperfection, and mystery. You stop demanding final answers. You learn to live with meaningful questions. And this is perhaps the greatest freedom, the freedom to not know everything, yet remain at peace. From here, the path continues, but quietly. There is no dramatic next step, only continued attention, continued care, continued participation. You live, you learn, you adjust. In the remaining parts, we will gently bring this journey toward completion, not by adding new teachings, but by deepening the understanding of how to sustain this way of being across time change and the inevitable cycles of life. When the sense of arrival dissolves, life does not pause. It continues quietly and steadily. The difference now is not in what happens, but in how it is carried. The disciplined mind no longer seeks intensity to feel alive. It values continuity, the ability to remain present across ordinary days, repeated routines, and slow seasons of change. This is where many people drift. They touch clarity, feel insight, experience calm, and then assume the work is done. Buddhism offers a gentler, more realistic understanding. Awakening is not a peak experience to maintain, but a way of relating that must be renewed again and again. Continuity is not dramatic. It is subtle loyalty to awareness. The Buddha compared practice to tuning a stringed instrument. Too tight and it breaks. Too loose and it makes no sound. Continuity lives in that balance. You do not strain to stay mindful. You do not abandon attention when life becomes dull. You stay close, neither forcing nor forgetting. Daily life tests this more than difficulty ever could. Crisis sharpens attention. Routine dulls it. The disciplined mind learns to meet repetition with freshness. Each breath is the first breath. Each conversation is the first conversation. This is not poetry, it is training. One of the most powerful insights at this stage is understanding that boredom is not the absence of meaning, but the absence of attention. When attention returns, the ordinary becomes alive again. The sound of footsteps, the weight of the body, the rhythm of breath. Nothing new is added. What changes is intimacy. Continuity also requires humility. You accept that some days will feel clear and others cloudy. You do not dramatize either. You practice on good days without pride. You practice on difficult days without despair. This evenness protects the path from burnout. The disciplined mind stops asking, "Am I progressing?" and starts asking, "Am I present?" This single shift sustains practice for decades. There is a short teaching often shared. Do not measure the path by moments of light. Measure it by your willingness to return. Returning is the practice. Continuity also means adapting practice to life's changing conditions. What worked in one season may not work in another. The Buddha encouraged flexibility. You adjust duration, form, and focus without abandoning intention. This adaptability is wisdom in action. When responsibilities increase, practice becomes shorter but more frequent. When energy is low, practice becomes gentler. When life is quiet, practice deepens. Nothing is lost. Everything is integrated. Continuity strengthens trust further. You stop needing reassurance that practice matters. You have seen enough. You know its effect. Even when benefits are subtle, you recognize their absence when practice fades. This knowing is steady. Another important aspect of continuity is care for the body. The Buddha never separated mind from body. A disciplined mind respects physical limits. It rests when needed. It nourishes itself. It does not use practice to bypass fatigue or pain. This care prevents spiritual ambition from turning into self-neglect. Continuity also refines speech. Over time, words become fewer and more precise. You speak when it helps. You remain silent when it doesn't. This restraint is not suppression. It is discernment matured into habit. As continuity deepens, practice becomes less visible. There is no announcement, no special posture. Awareness lives quietly beneath action. You may not always feel spiritual, but you are grounded. This grounding is enough. And now, as continuity stabilizes the path, the mind becomes ready for a final deepening, not forward, but inward into stillness that is present even within movement. In the next part, we will explore how stillness and activity coexist and how the disciplined mind learns to rest without withdrawing. As continuity settles into daily life, stillness begins to reveal itself in an unexpected way, not as silence apart from movement, but as something that exists within it. The disciplined mind discovers that stillness is not the opposite of activity. It is the space that holds activity without being disturbed by it. This is a profound turning point. Many people believe peace requires withdrawal, fewer responsibilities, fewer relationships, fewer demands. Buddhism teaches a more radical possibility. Peace can exist in the middle of noise, change, and effort, not because the world has become calm, but because the mind no longer resists it. Stillness is what remains when unnecessary movement stops. This stillness is felt first in the body. Muscles soften, breath deepens, movements become economical. There is less rushing, less bracing, less inner commentary. Even when the day is full, something inside stays unhurried. The Buddha taught that agitation comes not from action itself, but from craving and aversion attached to action. When these fall away, activity becomes light. You do what needs to be done without pushing against yourself. There is a simple image often used to describe this. A wheel turns rapidly, yet its center remains still. The disciplined mind lives at that center. This stillness does not make you passive. It makes you precise. Because the mind is not scattered, it can respond quickly without panic. Because it is not tense, it can sustain effort without exhaustion. Stillness also deepens perception. When the mind is quiet, you notice subtleties, a shift in tone, a tightening in the chest, a moment when silence would help more than words. This sensitivity allows you to act earlier, more gently, more effectively. In meditation, stillness may appear as gaps between thoughts. At first, these gaps are brief. Over time, they widen. But the goal is not to chase them. Stillness cannot be forced. It appears when effort relaxes into attention. This lesson carries into life. When something difficult happens, the disciplined mind does not rush to explain or fix immediately. It pauses. It allows space. Often the most skillful response arises from this pause. Stillness also transforms listening. You stop waiting for your turn to speak. You hear what is actually being said, not just the words, but the feeling beneath them. This depth of listening is rare, and it changes relationships profoundly. Another effect of stillness is emotional regulation. When emotions arise, they do not hijack the mind. You feel them fully, but they move through a larger space. This prevents overwhelm and allows emotional intelligence to guide action. The Buddha taught that stillness and insight support each other. A calm mind sees clearly. A clear mind rests easily. Together, they stabilize awareness. Importantly, stillness is not numbness. You still feel joy. You still feel sorrow, but these feelings are held in awareness rather than acted out unconsciously. This makes emotional life richer, not flatter. As stillness deepens, your relationship with silence changes. Silence is no longer empty or awkward. It becomes nourishing. You begin to value moments without stimulation. This does not mean rejecting the world. It means giving the mind room to breathe. The disciplined mind learns to alternate naturally between engagement and rest, action and stillness, speaking and listening, doing and being. This rhythm prevents burnout and supports longevity. At this stage, practice feels almost invisible. There is no sense of now I meditate and now I stop. Awareness flows across activities. You notice yourself washing your hands, walking, pausing. Nothing special. Everything complete. And as stillness stabilizes within movement, one final realization becomes unavoidable. The mind no longer needs to be managed so tightly. Trust replaces control. In the next part, we will explore how to live from this trust, how to allow life to unfold without losing clarity, and how surrender becomes strength rather than weakness. When stillness becomes familiar, the grip of control begins to loosen. Not because you stop caring, but because you begin to trust life more deeply. This trust is not passive surrender, nor is it blind optimism. In Buddhism, it is the wisdom of letting life unfold without interference while remaining fully present within it. Control once felt necessary. It promised safety. It gave the illusion that if you planned enough, guarded enough, resisted enough, you could avoid pain. But through practice, you have seen that control often creates the very tension it tries to prevent. The disciplined mind now understands a quieter strength surrender without collapse. Surrender here does not mean giving up responsibility. It means releasing the struggle against what is already happening. When the mind stops arguing with reality, energy returns, clarity sharpens, action becomes appropriate rather than reactive. The Buddha never asked his students to dominate life. He asked them to understand it. There is a gentle teaching that reflects this stage. When you stop pushing the river, you discover it was already carrying you. Living from trust means you still act, but you act from listening rather than fear. You prepare where preparation is possible. You respond where response is needed, and where neither helps you rest. This balance transforms anxiety. Anxiety feeds on imagined futures and the belief that you must control them. Trust brings the mind back to now, where action is possible and presence is enough. You stop rehearsing disasters that have not arrived. You meet what is actually here. Trust also softens ambition. You still move forward, but without desperation. You allow effort to be guided rather than forced. If something does not unfold as expected, you adjust without bitterness. This adaptability is not resignation, it is intelligence. The disciplined mind now understands that clarity is not fragile. It does not vanish when plans fail. It does not collapse when uncertainty appears. It remains available because it is rooted in awareness, not circumstance. Surrender also deepens humility. You recognize that life is shaped by countless conditions beyond personal will. This realization does not diminish you. It frees you from carrying impossible weight. You do your part fully and release the rest. This humility allows learning to continue. When you stop insisting on being right, insight expands. When you stop defending identity, wisdom deepens. You remain teachable. Trust also reshapes how you experience effort. Effort no longer feels like resistance. It feels like cooperation. You work with conditions instead of against them. This reduces friction and increases effectiveness. In relationships, surrender looks like allowing others to be as they are. You stop trying to fix or control them. You offer presence instead of pressure. Paradoxically, this openness often invites change more than force ever could. This stage also brings peace with uncertainty. You accept that not everything will be resolved neatly. Some questions remain open. Some paths remain unclear. And yet, you are not lost. You are attentive. The Buddha taught that wisdom does not eliminate mystery. It coexists with it. As surrender matures, the mind becomes spacious. You no longer rush to fill silence or uncertainty. You allow things to unfold. This patience reveals timing. It prevents premature action. Surrender also protects compassion. When you stop demanding outcomes, you can care without exhaustion. You give what is appropriate and let go of the rest. This preserves energy and clarity. At this stage, discipline feels effortless, not because effort disappears, but because resistance does. You are no longer pushing against yourself or the world. You are moving with what is. And now, as trust replaces control, the mind becomes ready for the final movement of the path. Gratitude without attachment. The ability to appreciate life deeply without clinging to it. In the next part, we will explore how gratitude completes the training of the mind and transforms ordinary moments into quiet fulfillment. When trust replaces control, the heart naturally opens to gratitude, not the forced gratitude that ignores pain, and not the polite gratitude spoken out of habit, but a quiet appreciation that arises when the mind is no longer grasping. In Buddhism, gratitude is not something you practice to feel better. It is something that appears when resistance fades. This gratitude is subtle. It does not depend on life being perfect. It exists alongside difficulty. You can feel grateful and grieving at the same time. You can appreciate what is here without denying what is missing. This balance is a sign of deep maturity. The disciplined mind understands that nothing is guaranteed. This understanding does not make life bleak, it makes it precious. When you truly see impermanence, each moment becomes unrepeatable. Gratitude naturally follows. The Buddha taught that appreciation deepens awareness. When you are grateful, you are present. You notice what is actually happening instead of what you wish were happening. This presence brings quiet joy. Gratitude at this stage is not focused on achievements or possessions. It is focused on conditions: breath, time, opportunity, the ability to learn, the chance to care. These are not dramatic, but they are profound. There is a simple reflection often used in Buddhist practice. This breath is a gift. This moment is enough. Such reflections are not meant to convince the mind. They are reminders to notice what is already true. Gratitude also softens ambition. You still grow, still act, still contribute, but you are no longer driven by lack. You move from fullness rather than hunger. This changes the quality of effort. It becomes generous instead of grasping. This form of gratitude is inseparable from non-attachment. You appreciate without holding. You enjoy without fearing loss. You thank without demanding continuation. This makes joy more stable, not less. In daily life, gratitude shows itself quietly. You savor simple meals. You value small kindnesses. You acknowledge effort, your own and others, without inflating it. You become easier to be around because you are not constantly reaching elsewhere. Gratitude also dissolves resentment. When the mind recognizes what it has received, it stops keeping score so tightly. This does not erase injustice or pain, but it prevents bitterness from consuming you. The disciplined mind sees gratitude as a form of wisdom. It reminds you that life has always been supporting you in ways you did not plan. This realization deepens trust further. Gratitude also strengthens continuity. When practice feels ordinary, gratitude keeps it alive. You remember why attention matters. You remember how far the mind has come, not as a story of achievement, but as lived change. At this stage, gratitude is not something you list. It is a tone, a way of meeting the day, a softness in the chest, a steadiness in the breath. The Buddha taught that gratitude and generosity naturally arise together. When you appreciate life, you want to give back not from obligation, but from overflow. This generosity may be material, emotional, or simply presence. This generosity completes the cycle. Discipline leads to clarity. Clarity leads to compassion. Compassion leads to service. Service deepens gratitude. Gratitude sustains discipline. Nothing is forced. Everything supports everything else. Now, as gratitude settles, the mind becomes ready for reflection on impermanence. One final time, not as a concept, but as lived understanding of mortality and meaning. In the next part, we will explore how awareness of impermanence sharpens love, presence, and purpose without fear. When gratitude deepens, impermanence no longer feels like a threat. It becomes a teacher that sharpens love, attention, and meaning. The disciplined mind now meets impermanence not with fear, but with intimacy. You understand not intellectually, but viscerally, that everything you experience is temporary. And because of this, everything matters. The Buddha spoke often of death, not to darken the mind, but to awaken it. Awareness of impermanence is not meant to produce anxiety. It is meant to dissolve procrastination of the heart. When you truly know that moments do not repeat, you stop postponing presence. Impermanence refines priorities. You speak what matters sooner. You forgive more quickly. You listen more fully. You waste less energy on what does not endure. This is not urgency. It is clarity. The disciplined mind understands that fear of impermanence comes from clinging. When you demand that life stay fixed, change feels like loss. When you accept change as the nature of life, each moment becomes complete in itself. You stop asking for guarantees. and start offering attention. There is a quiet Buddhist reflection often practiced. Everything I love will change. I love it anyway. This is not resignation. It is courage. Impermanence also transforms love. Love becomes less possessive and more reverent. You cherish people not as permanent fixtures, but as living, changing beings. You allow them to grow. You appreciate them without needing to secure them. This makes love gentler and deeper. In relationships, impermanence reduces control. You stop trying to freeze moments or define others by who they were. You meet them as they are now. This presence nourishes connection far more than expectation ever could. Impermanence also reshapes suffering. When pain arises, you remember that it will change. This does not minimize it. It gives it context. You stay present without drowning. You grieve without despair. You endure without hardening. The Buddha taught that what is born will pass, and what passes makes space for what comes next. This understanding brings a quiet trust in renewal. Even endings contain beginnings. The disciplined mind also learns to apply impermanence to identity. You stop defining yourself by roles, mistakes, or past versions. You recognize that you are a process, not a product. This releases shame and fear. You allow yourself to evolve. Impermanence frees you from perfectionism. Since nothing lasts, there is no need to make everything flawless. Sincerity becomes more important than performance. Presence becomes more valuable than polish. This insight also brings humility. You recognize how little control you have over outcomes and how much influence you have over intention. You stop trying to secure legacy and start focusing on impact in this moment. Impermanence gives courage to act. When you know time is limited, you stop waiting for ideal conditions. You begin where you are. You offer what you can. You speak honestly. You live more directly. This directness does not make life reckless. It makes it meaningful. The Buddha taught that awareness of death is the guardian of mindfulness. Not because death is morbid, but because it reminds you that distraction is expensive. Each moment spent unconscious is a moment that does not return. At this stage, impermanence no longer produces sadness. It produces tenderness. You touch life lightly. You savor what is here. You release what must go. And in this tenderness, something profound emerges. Peace without denial. A peace that knows loss, change, and uncertainty and remains open. In the next part, we will explore how to live from this tenderness in a world that often feels harsh, and how the disciplined mind protects gentleness without becoming fragile. When impermanence is fully understood, the heart becomes tender, but not weak. Tenderness here does not mean vulnerability without strength. It means openness that is supported by clarity. The disciplined mind learns how to remain gentle in a world that often feels rushed, harsh, and demanding, without hardening or withdrawing. This is one of the most delicate balances on the path. Without discipline, tenderness becomes fragile. Without tenderness, discipline becomes cruel. Buddhism teaches that true strength holds both. Tenderness begins with presence. When you are fully present, you cannot be careless. You notice tone, timing, impact. You sense when pressure would harm and when encouragement would help. This sensitivity is not emotional overload. It is refined attention. The Buddha described this quality as non-harming, not only refraining from physical harm, but also from unnecessary mental and emotional harm. You learn to speak truth without sharpness. You learn to act decisively without aggression. This kind of gentleness requires courage. It is easier to armor the heart than to keep it open. It is easier to become numb than to remain sensitive. The disciplined mind chooses the harder path to feel fully without being ruled by feeling. Tenderness also applies inward. You stop pushing yourself harshly. You respect limits. You allow rest. This self-respect prevents burnout and resentment. It sustains practice over time. At this stage, inner dialogue becomes kinder, not indulgent, but fair. You acknowledge effort. You forgive missteps. You guide yourself as you would guide someone you care about. This inner gentleness stabilizes the mind more effectively than self-criticism ever could. In a harsh world, tenderness is protected by boundaries. Buddhism does not teach openness without discernment. You learn when to engage and when to step back. You learn when silence is wisdom. You learn that saying no can be an act of compassion. The disciplined mind understands that not every battle deserves energy. You conserve strength for what matters. Tenderness also deepens listening. When you are not defensive, you can hear discomfort beneath words. You recognize that harshness in others often hides pain. This does not excuse harmful behavior, but it changes how you respond. You address the behavior without dehumanizing the person. This way of responding interrupts cycles of conflict. It does not escalate. It clarifies. The Buddha taught that hatred never ends hatred. Only understanding can do that. Tenderness is understanding in action. Another effect of tenderness is patience. You stop rushing growth in yourself and others. You allow learning to unfold. You trust time. This patience reduces frustration and increases effectiveness. Tenderness also preserves joy. When the heart is open, small joys are felt fully. You notice beauty without grasping. You appreciate kindness without suspicion. Life feels less heavy. Importantly, tenderness does not require approval. You can be gentle without agreeing. You can be compassionate without compromising values. This clarity keeps gentleness from becoming weakness. At this stage, discipline is no longer about restraint alone. It is about care. Care for the mind. Care for relationships. Care for the quality of each moment. This care creates a sense of safety internally and externally. People feel calmer around you, not because you fix things, but because you do not add tension. As tenderness stabilizes, the mind becomes deeply resilient, not armored, but flexible. It bends without breaking. It feels without drowning. And now, as the path nears completion, one final understanding settles in the realization that this way of living does not need protection, defense, or constant explanation. It is self-sustaining. In the next part, we will explore how to live this understanding quietly, without clinging to teachings or identity, how to simply be. Go tiep tus, jinhan fan tiep theo. Part 27. When tenderness becomes stable and discipline feels like care rather than control, something subtle happens. The need to explain yourself fades. You no longer feel compelled to justify your way of living, your pace, or your values, not because you have become indifferent to others, but because your life itself has become coherent. This coherence does not argue. It simply exists. The Buddha often taught in silence, not because words were useless, but because some understandings cannot be transmitted through explanation. They are recognized through presence. At this stage, practice becomes quiet in the deepest sense, not hidden, not withdrawn, but unannounced. You stop asking, "Am I doing this right?" You stop needing confirmation that your path is valid. You stop comparing your inner world with someone else's outer display. This is not arrogance. It is simplicity. The disciplined mind now trusts its own clarity. It does not cling to teachings as identity. Teachings have done their work. Like a raft used to cross a river, they are not carried on the back afterward. Gratitude remains, but attachment dissolves. This does not mean you abandon learning. It means learning becomes fluid. You listen openly. You read deeply. You reflect honestly. But you are no longer collecting concepts to feel complete. You are refining understanding to live well. There is a story often attributed to Zen tradition that reflects this stage. A student asked, "What is enlightenment like?" The teacher replied, "Before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood and carry water." The difference is not in the action. It is in the absence of inner struggle. Living quietly does not mean being passive. You still speak when clarity calls for speech. You still act when action is needed. But you are no longer driven by the urge to correct, impress, or convert. You trust that people find their way in their own time. This trust extends to yourself as well. You allow uncertainty without rushing to close it. You allow questions to remain alive. You understand that not knowing is not a failure, it is a sign of openness. At this stage, identity becomes light. You no longer define yourself tightly. You are not the disciplined one, the mindful one, or the awakened one. These labels would only freeze something that is alive. You remain human, responsive, imperfect learning. This humanity is what makes presence genuine. The disciplined mind now rests easily in ordinary moments. Waiting is no longer wasted time. Silence is no longer awkward. Doing nothing no longer feels unproductive. You recognize that being fully present is already complete. This recognition changes your relationship with achievement. You still create, build, and contribute, but success does not determine your inner weather. You enjoy accomplishment without clinging. You accept limitation without shame. There is dignity in this balance. Living quietly also means conserving energy. You stop engaging in unnecessary conflict. You choose clarity over argument. You recognize when words will not help. This discernment preserves peace. The Buddha taught that true practice leaves fewer footprints. It does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It expresses itself naturally through patience, steadiness, and care. As this quiet living stabilizes, fear of losing the path fades. You realize that the path is not something you hold, it is something you are. As long as awareness remains, return is always possible. Even when you forget, you remember how to remember. This is perhaps the deepest confidence of all. Now, as the journey approaches its final movements, what remains is not effort, not striving, not improvement, but continuity of being. Living this way across time, aging, and change. In the next part, we will explore how this understanding carries you through the later chapters of life, through loss, transition, and renewal without losing center. As life moves forward, time makes itself known. The body changes, roles shift, energy rises and falls in new patterns. People come and go. The disciplined mind does not resist this movement. It learns how to age, change, and adapt without losing center. This is where the teachings reveal their deepest practicality. Buddhism never separated awakening from the reality of time. The Buddha himself aged, became ill, and died. His teaching was not how to escape these facts, but how to meet them with dignity and clarity. As years pass, the mind trained in awareness does not cling to past versions of itself. You do not demand the energy of youth, the certainty of earlier stages, or the identity of who you once were. You adapt without bitterness. You grieve without becoming stuck. This adaptability is one of the greatest gifts of discipline. When the body slows, attention deepens. When ambition softens, meaning clarifies. When roles dissolve, essence remains. You discover that what truly matters was never dependent on strength, speed, or recognition. The disciplined mind also learns how to meet loss as a companion, not an enemy. Loss of people, loss of health, loss of familiar structures. These experiences are not treated as personal failures. They are recognized as part of shared human reality. Because you have practiced impermanence throughout life, it does not shock you when change arrives. It still hurts, but it does not confuse. You know how to stay present. You know how to grieve honestly. You know how to let sorrow move through without closing the heart. This capacity is rare, and it is precious. In later chapters of life, silence often becomes more meaningful than activity. The disciplined mind welcomes this. You do not fear quiet. You listen more. You reflect more. You savor less stimulation and more depth. This does not mean disengagement. It means refinement. You become a steady presence for others navigating their own transitions, not by offering solutions, but by modeling steadiness. People sense that you are not rushing away from difficulty. This gives them permission to stay with their own experience. The Buddha taught that the highest form of teaching is example. As identity loosens further, you feel less pressure to leave a mark. You focus on being of benefit where you are. Small acts, honest presence, quiet generosity. These become the legacy. This does not mean abandoning goals. It means choosing goals aligned with wisdom rather than ego. You invest energy where it truly matters. The disciplined mind also prepares gently for death, not with fear, but with realism. You understand that life is finite, and because of this, each moment is sufficient. You do not postpone love. You do not withhold forgiveness. You do not cling unnecessarily. Preparation here does not mean morbid focus. It means living so that there is less unfinished business in the heart. This preparation brings peace. The Buddha taught that how one lives determines how one dies. A mind trained in awareness, compassion, and equanimity meets the end as it met life with presence. As life continues to change, the path does not narrow. It simplifies. What remains is essence, awareness, kindness, clarity. And now, as this journey nears its close, one final reflection remains, not about practice, but about what it all points to. In the next and final part, we will bring everything together, not as summary, but as a quiet return to the beginning, where the mind simply rests as it is. Go tiep tuk jinhan fan tiep theo. Part 29. As the journey draws near its end, the teachings begin to fold back into themselves, not as repetition, but as recognition. What once felt like a path now feels like a remembering. You realize that everything you practiced, discipline, mindfulness, compassion, equanimity, was not about becoming someone else. It was about removing what obscured what was already here. The Buddha often spoke of awakening as uncovering, not acquiring. Like cleaning dust from a mirror, the reflection was never created by effort. It was revealed by care. At this stage, the mind no longer searches for meaning outside of experience. Meaning is not something to be discovered later. It is found in how fully you meet what is here now. A breath, a feeling, a choice. Each moment is complete when lived with awareness. You understand now that the mind was never an enemy. It was confused, distracted, conditioned. With patience and kindness, it learned to settle. And when it settled, clarity emerged naturally. There is a deep forgiveness here. Forgiveness for the years spent lost in thought. Forgiveness for mistakes made without awareness. Forgiveness for the struggle itself. Nothing was wasted. Everything contributed. The disciplined mind rests without effort. Not asleep, not withdrawn, but awake in a quiet way. Thoughts may still arise. Emotions may still move. Life continues. But there is no longer a sense of being pushed around by experience. You are no longer chasing peace. You are no longer afraid of disturbance. Peace and disturbance are both recognized as passing conditions. Awareness remains. This recognition brings profound simplicity. You stop adding unnecessary layers to life. You trust direct experience. You respond honestly. You rest when needed. You act when called. The Buddha taught that freedom is not found in special states, but in the absence of clinging. When nothing is grasped, nothing binds. At this point, even the idea of practice becomes light. You are not practicing to get somewhere. You are living attentively, because that is how life is best lived. Attention is no longer a tool. It is the ground. This does not make life predictable. It makes it workable. You still feel love. You still feel loss. You still feel joy and sorrow. But none of these define you. They are weather passing through an open sky. There is a quiet confidence now. Not the confidence of certainty, but the confidence of presence. You know that whatever arises, you can meet it. You have done so many times before. This confidence is gentle. It does not announce itself. It simply allows you to live without constant defense. As the path completes its circle, you see that the beginning was already enough. The mind, when met with awareness, compassion, and patience, naturally inclines toward peace. Nothing needed to be forced. Nothing needed to be rejected. And so what remains is very simple. To wake up, to be present, to respond with care, to let go when holding hurts, to rest when rest is needed. This is the teaching lived rather than spoken. In the final part, we will not add anything new. We will simply allow this understanding to settle like dust falling after movement until the mind rests naturally without instruction. Now there is nothing left to add, not because everything has been explained, but because explanation is no longer needed. The journey that began with effort ends in ease. The path that once felt long reveals itself as circular. You arrive where you have always been, only now without resistance. The mind rests not because it is controlled, but because it is understood. This is not a dramatic ending. It is a quiet settling. The Buddha never described awakening as fireworks or final answers. He described it as the end of unnecessary struggle. The mind no longer fights what it cannot change. It no longer chases what cannot satisfy. It no longer turns against itself. What remains is simple presence. You wake up and you are here. You breathe and you know it. You act and your action is aligned. You rest and rest is enough. Nothing mystical, nothing lacking. At this point, life does not need to be interpreted. It is lived. You trust direct experience more than thought. You listen more than you explain. You allow more than you resist. Silence becomes friendly. Solitude becomes nourishing. Connection becomes honest. You are no longer trying to master the mind. You are no longer afraid of it. Thoughts come and go like clouds. Emotions move like weather. Awareness remains like the sky, unchanged by what passes through it. This is not detachment from life. It is intimacy with it. Pain may still visit. Loss may still arrive. Uncertainty will still appear. But none of these convince you that something has gone wrong. You meet them with the same steadiness you meet joy, with openness without grasping. The disciplined mind now understands the deepest lesson of all. Peace is not found by arranging the world. It is found by no longer fighting it. Nothing is excluded from this peace. Not failure, not imperfection, not change. Everything belongs. The Buddha taught that when craving ends, suffering ends, not because life becomes ideal, but because the heart stops demanding that it be other than it is. And so you live. You live with attention because it feels true. You live with kindness because it feels natural. You live with restraint because it protects clarity. You live with openness because there is nothing left to defend. You do not cling to this way of living. You do not name it. You do not fear losing it. If it fades, you return. You always know how to return. This is the quiet confidence the path offers. No finish line, no final identity, no permanent state to protect. Only a mind that knows how to come home. And in that knowing, life unfolds ordinary, fragile, precious, exactly as it is.